Single dad bus driver let a crying woman ride for free until she revealed who she really was, and when her daughter called him grandpa, he realized the son he buried never died alone. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Walter's bus rolled through the Pittsburgh streets, windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm against the persistent drizzle. The morning light struggled to break through heavy clouds, casting everything in shades of gray. At each stop, familiar faces climbed aboard. The early shift workers, sleepy-eyed students, and elderly folks heading to their medical appointments. Walter greeted each one with a gentle nod, his hand steady on the wheel. "Morning, Mr. Jenkins," called out Mrs. Rodriguez, a regular who worked at the hospital cafeteria. She dropped her coins into the fare box with a familiar clinking sound. "Morning, ma'am," Walter replied, his deep voice carrying the warmth he'd cultivated over years of service. Though his responses were brief, his passengers knew him as reliable and kind, a steady presence in their daily lives. Between stops, Walter's mind wandered to the young woman from yesterday. Her face had been tear-stained, her shoulders hunched against some invisible weight. Something about her vulnerability had stirred memories of Marcus, how his son had always been the first to help someone in need. The bus lurched to a stop at the corner of Maple and Fifth, and Walter's heart skipped a beat. There she was again, the same young woman, standing at his bus stop. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She wore the same clothes as yesterday, now wrinkled and dampened by the morning mist. She climbed the steps slowly, her hands trembling as she searched through her pockets. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. "I still don't have the fare." Walter studied her face in the large rearview mirror. She couldn't have been more than 25, around the age Marcus would be now. The thought sent a familiar ache through his chest. "Take a seat," he said quietly, gesturing toward the back. "It's too wet to be standing out there." Relief flooded her face, though her eyes remained distant and troubled. She made her way down the aisle, choosing the same spot as yesterday, the last row, away from other passengers. As Walter drove on, he kept glancing in his mirror. The young woman sat with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, staring out the window as Pittsburgh's neighborhood slid past. Every few minutes, she would wipe her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket. The morning progressed, passengers coming and going in their usual rhythm, but Walter's thoughts kept returning to the distressed young woman. Marcus had always said that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was ask for help. His son's words echoed in his mind as he approached her stop, the same one where she'd gotten off yesterday. But this time, before she could rise from her seat, Walter spoke up. "Miss?" His voice carried clearly through the now empty bus. "There's a diner just around the corner. They serve a decent breakfast." She hesitated, one hand on the seat in front of her. "My break's coming up," Walter continued, surprising himself. He hadn't invited anyone to share a meal since his wife passed. "If you'd like some company." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she nodded. Walter pulled the bus into its designated spot near Pete's Diner, a small establishment with steamy windows and the smell of coffee wafting from its doors. He completed his safety checks and secured the bus, then led the way inside, the young woman following a few steps behind. The diner was warm and bright, a sharp contrast to the gray morning outside. They settled into a booth near the window, where they could see the bus and any approaching passengers for Walter's next run. "I'm Walter Jenkins," he said, watching as she gripped the laminated menu with unsteady hands. "Charlotte," she replied softly. "Charlotte Miller." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it was the first time he'd heard her speak more than a few words. Doris, the morning waitress who knew Walter's usual order by heart, approached with coffee. "2 cups?" she asked, eyebrows raised slightly at the unexpected company. Walter nodded. "And 2 breakfast specials, please." As Doris walked away, Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to do this, Mr. Jenkins. I can't pay you back." "Not asking you to," Walter replied, his voice gentle but firm. He stirred sugar into his coffee, giving her time to compose herself. "Sometimes folks just need a friendly ear." Charlotte's hands trembled as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. "Start with why you're riding my bus with no destination," Walter suggested. It was something he'd noticed, how she just rode in circles, never really going anywhere. She took a shaky breath. "I'm looking for someone," she said finally, "or trying to work up the courage to find them. I'm not sure which anymore." Walter nodded, waiting patiently as she gathered her thoughts. The breakfast plates arrived, eggs, toast, and hash browns steaming on worn ceramic dishes. Charlotte stared at the food as if she couldn't remember the last time she'd seen a proper meal. "You remind me of someone," she said suddenly, looking up at Walter. "Something in your eyes. It's familiar." Walter felt a strange tightening in his chest. He'd seen thousands of faces on his bus over the years, but something about Charlotte's presence tugged at him in a way he couldn't explain. Maybe it was just that she was close to Marcus's age, or maybe it was the way she seemed so lost. The kind of lost his son would never have been able to walk past without helping. "Eat," he said gently, pushing the plate closer to her. "Whatever you're facing, it'll be easier with some food in your stomach." Charlotte picked up her fork, and as she took her first bite, a tear rolled down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means." Walter watched her eat, his own breakfast nearly forgotten. In the soft diner light, away from the harsh fluorescence of the bus, she looked even younger, more vulnerable. His father's heart, which had been dormant for so long, stirred with concern. The rain continued to fall outside, drawing crooked patterns on the diner window. Inside, in this moment of shared silence and simple kindness, something shifted. Walter couldn't name it yet, but he felt the weight of it, like the first note of a song he'd forgotten he knew. The next morning brought clearer skies, though Walter's thoughts remained clouded by memories of the crying woman on his bus. He pulled his lunchbox from his locker at the depot, his routine unchanged in 15 years. Same turkey, sandwich, same apple, same thermos of black coffee. The depot's small cafe sat tucked between the administrative offices and the driver's lounge, its faded sign promising hot coffee and fresh sandwiches. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead while the scent of brewing coffee and grilled cheese sandwiches filled the air. A few drivers occupied the vinyl-covered booths, their conversations a familiar background noise. Walter chose his usual spot by the window, where sunlight warmed the worn Formica tabletop. He unwrapped his sandwich, his movements deliberate and measured, when movement at the counter caught his eye. His hands froze mid-motion. There she was, the same woman from yesterday, but transformed. Her blonde hair was neatly pulled back, her uniform crisp and clean. No tears stained her cheeks now, though something in her posture still spoke of uncertainty. She moved behind the counter with careful precision, like someone trying very hard not to make a mistake. Their eyes met across the room. Recognition flickered in hers, followed by something else. Determination, perhaps. Walter watched as she straightened her shoulders and made her way toward his table, coffee pot in hand. "Would you like some coffee, sir?" Her voice was soft, but steadier than yesterday. Up close, he could see the light dusting of freckles across her nose, the slight tremble in her hands as she held the pot. "Yes, thank you." Walter's voice came out gruffer than he intended. She filled his cup with care, then hesitated. I wanted to thank you. For yesterday, on the bus." Walter nodded, his eyes fixed on the rising steam from his cup. "I'm Charlotte," she continued, then swallowed hard before adding, "Charlotte Bell." The name hit Walter like a physical blow. Bell? The coffee cup clattered slightly as he set it down, memories rushing back with devastating clarity. Rosemary Bell's face, twisted with contempt, pointing her finger at him in that department store. The security guard's rough hands, the police officer's skeptical eyes. "You expect us to believe Mrs. Bell would steal her own jewelry?" His heart hammered against his ribs as he looked up at Charlotte again. The resemblance was there, in the delicate slope of her nose, the curve of her chin, but where Rosemary's eyes had been cold and accusing, Charlotte's held a warmth tinged with shame. "You're Rosemary Bell's daughter." It wasn't a question. Charlotte's fingers tightened around the coffee pot handle. "Yes," she whispered. "And I know what she did to you. What happened at Marshall's department store in 1980? The words hung heavy in the air between them. Walter's mouth went dry. That incident had altered the course of his life. The arrest record had cost him multiple job opportunities, forced him to change his plans for college. Even after Mrs. Bell had found her missing jewelry in her car 2 weeks later, the damage had been done. "I was 19, Walter said, his voice rough, with remembered pain. "Just a stock boy trying to earn money for school." "I know," Charlotte said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I found the newspaper clippings in my mother's study when I was 16. She never spoke about it, but I read everything. What she did." She stopped, swallowing hard. "There's no excuse." Walter pushed back from the table, his sandwich forgotten. The cafe walls suddenly felt too close, the air too thick. Old anger mixed with fresh shock in his chest, making it hard to breathe. Here was living proof that the woman who had nearly ruined his life had gone on to have a family, to raise a daughter, while he had struggled for years to overcome the shadow of that false accusation. "I can't," he started, then stopped. What could he say? That he couldn't sit here and look at her? That every time he saw her face, he'd see her mother's? That 43 years wasn't long enough to forget the humiliation, the helplessness, the rage? Charlotte took a step back, understanding flooding her features. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm so sorry." Walter stood, his movements stiff. Without another word, he walked out of the cafe, leaving his untouched lunch behind. His feet carried him through the depot's corridors on autopilot while his mind reeled. Each step echoed with memories he'd thought long buried. The clang of the holding cell door, his mother's tears as she scraped together bail money, the whispers that followed him for years afterward. He found himself in the empty driver's lounge, his breathing heavy, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped the back of a chair. Through the window, he could see buses pulling in and out of the depot, drivers going about their regular routines. But for Walter, nothing felt regular anymore. The past had walked right up to his table and poured him coffee, wearing the face of his accuser's daughter. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bus stop as Walter pulled up to his regular route. His hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter when he spotted a familiar figure standing alone at the curb. Charlotte Bell stood there, her shoulders hunched against the autumn chill, wearing the same cafe uniform she'd had on earlier that week. Walter's jaw clenched. He'd spent days trying to push away memories of that old arrest, of standing in front of a judge while Rosemary Bell's lies painted him as a thief. His finger hovered over the door control, tempted to just drive past. But duty won out. He was a professional, after all. The doors hissed open. Charlotte climbed aboard, her movements careful and deliberate. A few other passengers sat scattered throughout the bus, paying no attention to the tension crackling in the air. "Mr. Jenkins," she said softly, reaching into her pocket. "I wanted to return this." Her hand trembled slightly as she held out a crumpled dollar bill. "From the other day when you let me ride without a ticket?" Walter stared straight, ahead through the windshield. "Keep it, please," Charlotte insisted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to make this right." The bus idled at the stop, its engine rumbling beneath them. After a long moment, Walter reached out and took the bill, tucking it into his shirt pocket without looking at her. Charlotte didn't move toward a seat. Instead, she stood near the fare box, her fingers twisting together. "I know who you are, Mr. Jenkins, and I know what my mother did to you all those years ago." Walter's shoulders stiffened. A car honked behind the bus, but he barely registered the sound. "I'm not here on her behalf," Charlotte continued quickly. "I haven't spoken to her in months. She swallowed hard. "I left home. For good this time." An elderly passenger near the front cleared his throat pointedly, reminding them the bus was behind schedule. Walter finally turned to look at Charlotte directly. Her face was pale, but her eyes held steady. "Ma'am, I need to continue my route," he said formally. "Could I—" Charlotte glanced at the other passengers, lowering her voice. "Could I talk to you when your shift ends? I'll wait at the depot." "Please?" Walter's first instinct was to refuse. He'd spent decades building walls around that particular wound, and here was this woman threatening to tear them down. But something in her expression, a familiar pain, perhaps, made him pause. "7 o'clock, he said shortly. "I can spare 10 minutes. Relief flooded Charlotte's face. "Thank you." She finally moved down the aisle, taking a seat near the middle of the bus. The rest of Walter's shift passed in a blur of stops and starts, passengers flowing in and out like a tide. His mind kept drifting back to Charlotte, to the way her voice had shaken when she mentioned her mother. At 7 sharp, he pulled into the depot. Charlotte was waiting on a bench near the employee entrance, a small backpack clutched in her lap. When she stood, Walter noticed how young she looked under the harsh depot lights, probably no older than his Marcus would have been. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, falling into step beside him as they walked toward a quieter corner of the parking lot. "I know you have every reason to want nothing to do with my family." Walter said nothing, but he slowed his pace to match hers. "My mother," Charlotte continued, her voice growing stronger. "She tried to control everything in my life. Who I could be friends with, what I could study, who I could love." She let out a shaky breath. "When I had my daughter, Emmy, she got worse. Started making plans for Emmy's whole future, just like she did with mine. She stopped walking, turning to face Walter directly. I couldn't let that happen, not to Emmy. So we left. The church shelter, Walter said, remembering her tears from that first bus ride. Charlotte nodded. It's not much, but it's safe. The ladies there have been kind to us. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if warding off a chill. I work at the cafe, and there's a daycare nearby that lets me make payments when I can. We're managing. Walter studied her face, looking for any trace of her mother's calculated manipulation. He found none. Instead, he saw exhaustion, determination, and a fierce kind of hope. Why are you telling me all this? He asked. Because I needed you to know that I understand, at least a little bit, what it's like to have Rosemary Bell try to destroy your life. Charlotte's voice cracked. And because I'm so sorry for what she did to you. I found out about it years ago in some old newspaper clippings. She never mentioned it, of course, just like she never mentions anything that doesn't fit her perfect world. Walter felt something shift inside him, like ice beginning to thaw. That was a long time ago, he said, his voice gentler than before. But it wasn't right, Charlotte insisted. And I've spent my whole life watching her do things that weren't right, pretending they were for the best. She wiped quickly at her eyes. I can't change what she did to you, but I couldn't just let you think I was anything like her. Not when you showed me kindness that day on the bus. A security light flickered on overhead, casting strange shadows across the parking lot. Walter thought about his own daughter, about the ways life could push people apart or bring them together in unexpected ways. Your daughter, he said finally. How old is she? A small smile touched Charlotte's lips. Emmy's 4. She's? Charlotte's eyes lit up for the first time. She's everything. Smart and funny and stubborn. She's why I had to leave. Why I have to make things work, no matter what. Walter nodded slowly. He understood that kind of love, the kind that made you rebuild your whole world around protecting someone. Thank you for listening, Mr. Jenkins, Charlotte said, shouldering her backpack. That's all I wanted to say. I won't bother you again. She turned to go, but Walter found himself speaking. Miss Bell. She looked back, surprised. The shelter? Is it Sister Mary's, over on Pine Street? Yes, she answered cautiously. They serve decent meals there? Charlotte hesitated. They do their best. Emmy likes the mac and cheese on Wednesdays. Walter thought of his own dinner waiting at home. Too much food for one person, as always. He thought of Marcus, who never met a stranger he wouldn't try to help. You two like meatloaf? Walter sat in his worn leather armchair, the one that had molded to his shape over countless solitary evenings. The house was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the old wall clock. In his weathered hands, he held a silver-framed photograph of Marcus in his military dress uniform, that proud smile forever frozen in time. What would you make of all this, son? Walter whispered to the image. The silence that followed felt heavier than usual. He leaned back, letting his mind drift to that day 38 years ago. The courtroom, materializing in his memory, was still sharp and clear, like a fresh wound that never quite healed. The polished wooden benches, the stern-faced judge, and, most vivid of all, Rosemary Bell's cold, accusatory stare from across the room. Walter had been 19 then, working as a janitor at the Bell family's department store while attending college on a partial scholarship. He could still feel the weight of those stolen jewelry accusations pressing down on his shoulders. His supervisor had found expensive pieces in his locker, planted there, he knew, but couldn't prove. I didn't do it, he'd said repeatedly, his voice steady despite his racing heart. But Rosemary Bell's testimony had been devastating. She'd spoken with such conviction about seeing him near the jewelry counter after hours, about his suspicious behavior. Her words had carried weight, the weight of money, influence, and the color of his skin, in a time when that mattered even more than it did now. The scholarship had been the first thing to go, then his job. The arrest record had followed him like a shadow for years afterward, closing doors before he could even knock. The military had been his salvation, giving him structure, purpose, and eventually a path to driving buses instead of cleaning floors. Walter's fingers traced the edge of Marcus's photograph. His son had been the light that made all that darkness worthwhile. Marcus, who'd grown up hearing these stories but never let them dim his own smile, who'd fallen in love with a girl named Charlotte. The realization hit Walter like a physical blow. Charlotte Bell. The timing would fit. But surely Marcus would have told him if he'd been involved with someone from that family? unless he hadn't known her full background. Unless. Walter set the photo down with trembling hands. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The next morning arrived with a pale sun struggling through Pittsburgh's perpetual cloud cover. Walter walked his usual route to the cafe where he grabbed his morning coffee before his shift. His steps slowed as he approached, seeing Charlotte standing near the entrance. But she wasn't alone. A little girl, no more than 5 or 6 years old, played nearby, drawing shapes in the morning frost on a parked car's window. Her brown curls bounced as she moved, and something in her profile, in the way she held her head, sent a jolt through Walter's chest. She had Marcus's eyes. Before Walter could process this revelation, the little girl turned and spotted him. Her face lit up with pure joy, the kind only children can manage. "Grandpa!" she shouted, her voice carrying across the morning air like a bell. Walter's whole body went rigid as the child ran toward him, her arms outstretched. Time seemed to slow down as she wrapped herself around his leg, hugging him with complete trust and affection. The weight of her small body against his knee felt both foreign and achingly familiar. "Emmy." Charlotte's voice cracked with panic as she rushed forward. "Emmy, no, let go of him right now." Her face had drained of all color, her hands shaking as she reached for her daughter. Walter stood frozen, unable to move or speak. The child, Emmy, looked up at him with Marcus's eyes, her small face full of confusion at her mother's distress. "But Mama, you said Grandpa was here. You showed me his picture." Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, finally managing to pull Emmy away from Walter's leg. "I'm so sorry." She wasn't supposed to. I never meant for. Walter found himself staring at Emmy's face, seeing echoes of his son in every feature. The shape of her nose, the curve of her smile, even the way she tilted her head slightly to the side. It was all Marcus. His heart thundered in his chest as pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving fell into place. "Is she?" Walter's voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. He couldn't finish the question. Charlotte pulled Emmy closer to her side, protective and terrified all at once. "Yes," she said softly, her eyes filling with tears. "She's Marcus's daughter, your granddaughter." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Walter gripped the nearby wall for support, his knees suddenly weak. Emmy looked between the adults, her innocent face clouded with concern. "Mama, did I do something wrong?" Charlotte smoothed her daughter's hair with a trembling hand. "No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong." She looked at Walter, her face a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "I should have told you differently. Better. I didn't know how." Walter stood there, rooted to the spot, as memories crashed over him like waves. Marcus's last leave home, his casual mentions of someone special he'd met, the letters that had grown more serious in tone before suddenly stopping. The timing aligned perfectly with Charlotte's pregnancy. His granddaughter? He had a granddaughter. The morning sun filtered through the maple trees at Wilson Park, casting dappled shadows on the worn wooden bench where Walter sat. His bus route didn't start for another 2 hours, but sleep had eluded him after Emmy's innocent words yesterday. He'd agreed to meet Charlotte here, away from prying eyes and curious ears. Charlotte arrived punctually at 7 without Emmy. She wore simple jeans and a faded blue sweater that had seen better days. A far cry from the privileged life Walter associated with the Bell name. Her fingers twisted nervously around the strap of her worn canvas bag as she approached. "Thank you for coming," she said softly, keeping a respectful distance. "I know you probably have 1,000 questions." Walter's jaw tightened. "Just tell me what you need to tell me." His voice was steady, but his heart hammered against his ribs. Charlotte sank onto the opposite end of the bench, her shoulders curved inward as if bearing an invisible weight. She pulled out an envelope from her bag, its edges soft from handling. "I met Marcus 6 years ago at a coffee shop near the university," she began, her voice trembling. "He was home on leave. We talked for hours that first day. He was different from anyone I'd ever known. Kind. Real." She smiled sadly at the memory. "We spent every possible moment together during his 2-week leave." Walter's hands gripped his knees. He remembered that leave, Marcus had seemed lighter somehow, distracted in a good way. He'd attributed it to the break from deployment. "When I found out I was pregnant," Charlotte continued, her voice catching, "I was terrified but happy. I tried calling Marcus, but he was back overseas. My mother," she took a shaky breath, She found out before I could reach him. She was furious. Said I was ruining everything she'd built for our family. She threatened to cut me off completely, to make sure I'd never finish college, never get a job in Pittsburgh. And you chose money over my son? Walter's words came out sharp, heated. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. No, God, no. I tried to stand up to her, but she had so much power. She controlled everything, my phone, my bank account, my car. She even threatened to call Marcus's commanding officer to cause problems for his career. She wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. I was weak. I let her isolate me. She sent me to a private facility in Vermont until Emmy was born. Walter stared straight ahead, watching a squirrel scamper across the path. His mind raced with images of Marcus during those final months, the extra shifts he'd picked up at the base, talking about saving for something special. Charlotte reached into the envelope with shaking hands and pulled out a photograph. This is the only picture I have of us together. Walter took it reluctantly. The image showed Marcus in civilian clothes, his arm around a younger Charlotte. They were both laughing at something off camera. Marcus's smile wide and genuine in a way that made Walter's chest ache. Emmy looks just like him, Charlotte whispered. Same smile, same little dimple on the left cheek, same way of scrunching up her nose when she's thinking hard about something. Walter studied the photo, his vision blurring. He'd noticed those same features in Emmy yesterday, but had dismissed them as coincidence. Now they felt like arrows to his heart. When? His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. When did you find out about Marcus's death? Charlotte's hands twisted in her lap. I saw it in the newspaper. By then, Emmy was 3. I'd finally gotten away from my mother, was trying to build a life for us. I wanted to reach out to you then, but the guilt. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. How do you tell someone their son died, never knowing he had a daughter? That you robbed them both of those precious years? Walter stood abruptly, needing space, needing air. The photograph trembled in his pan. Grip as memories flooded back. Marcus's last video call, his son's eyes bright with some unspoken hope. Had he somehow known about Charlotte? About the baby? The questions burned in Walter's throat. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, Charlotte said quietly. But Emmy deserves to know her family, to know the kind of man her father was. I've told her stories, shown her the few newspaper clippings I could find, but it's not enough. Walter turned back to face her, his expression a storm of conflicting emotions. You're right. You had no right to keep this from either of them. His voice was low, controlled, but underneath lay years of loss and fresh pain. Marcus deserved to know his child. He would have been there for both of you, whatever the cost. Charlotte nodded, tears flowing freely now. I know, that's what makes it so much worse. He would have been an amazing father. Walter slipped the photograph into his jacket pocket, next to his heart. I need time, he said, finally. It's too much right now. I understand, Charlotte whispered. She stood, clutching her bag like a shield. We're staying at Street. Mary's shelter on 4th Street. When? If you want to see Emmy again. She hesitated, then added softly, she already loves you, you know? Children have a way of seeing into people's hearts. Walter didn't respond. He couldn't. The weight of everything, Marcus, Emmy, the years lost, pressed against his chest like a physical thing. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Charlotte alone on the bench in the morning light. His feet carried him through the park automatically, past the playground where children's laughter echoed like ghosts of what could have been. In his pocket, the photograph burned like a brand, forcing him to confront a truth that would forever change his carefully ordered world. He had a granddaughter, a piece of Marcus living and breathing and calling him Grandpa with such innocent trust. And he had no idea what to do with that knowledge. The morning mist clung to the grass at Allegheny Cemetery, wrapping around the headstones like gentle fingers. Walter knelt before Marcus's grave, his knees protesting against the damp earth. The polished granite stone stood solid and familiar. Marcus David Jenkins, beloved son, brave soldier, words he'd read 1,000 times before. What am I supposed to do, son? Walter's voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. The American flag beside the headstone fluttered softly in the breeze. 5 years you've been gone, and now this? He pulled out the worn photograph Charlotte had given him, Marcus and her at what looked like a carnival, both of them young and laughing. His son's arm was wrapped around her shoulders, his smile wide and genuine. Walter had never seen this side of Marcus. This moment of pure joy captured in time. "Did you know?" he asked the stone. "Did you have any idea about the baby?" His throat tightened. "Your baby?" The cemetery remained silent except for the distant sound of morning traffic. A robin hopped between the headstones, pecking at the ground, unconcerned with Walter's turmoil. "Your mother would have known what to do," he continued, touching the cool stone. "She always did. But me? I'm just an old bus driver with too many memories and not enough answers." Walter stood slowly, his joints creaking. He straightened his uniform jacket, already running late for his shift. "That little girl, Emmy, she has your smile, son. Your exact smile." His voice cracked. "And those eyes. Lord help me, those are your eyes looking back at me." The morning bus route passed in a blur. Walter drove mechanically, muscle memory guiding him through the familiar streets of Pittsburgh. His mind kept wandering to Emmy's face, to the way she'd wrapped her arms around his leg without hesitation, to that pure, innocent trust that only children possess. At each stop, he found himself searching the crowds for Charlotte's face, though he knew she wouldn't be there. The weight of the past pressed down on him, not just Marcus's death now, but all those lost years, moments he could have had with his granddaughter. During his lunch break, Walter reached for his jacket and felt something crinkle in the pocket. Puzzled, he pulled out a folded piece of paper he didn't remember putting there. As he opened it, his hands began to tremble. The drawing was done in bright crayon colors, the kind of art only a child could create. 3 stick figures stood holding hands, a tall one wearing what looked like his bus driver's uniform, a medium-sized one with long yellow hair, and a small one in the middle with brown curly hair. Above them, in wobbly letters that must have been Charlotte's helping hand, were the words, "My family." Walter stared at the drawing until his vision blurred. Emmy must have slipped it into his pocket yesterday when she hugged him. The simple honesty of it, the hope, contained in those crayon lines, hit him harder than any words could have. He carefully folded the drawing and put it back in his pocket, close to his heart. The rest of his shift passed in a fog of memory and emotion. Marcus's first steps, his high school graduation, the proud set of his shoulders in his military uniform, and now Emmy's drawing, bridging past and present. After his final route, Walter found himself driving towards St. Mary's Church instead of home. The shelter attached to the church was a modest brick building, its windows warm with light in the growing dusk. He sat in his car for a long moment, gathering his courage. The shelter's entrance was marked by a simple wooden cross. Walter stepped inside, where a kind-faced nun directed him to the common room. He found Charlotte sitting at a small table, helping Emmy with what appeared to be a puzzle. The little girl spotted him first. "Grandpa!" Emmy's face lit up with that familiar smile, Marcus's smile, and Walter's heart squeezed in his chest. Charlotte's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise and uncertainty. She started to rise, but Walter held up a hand. "Please," he said softly, "stay seated." He cleared his throat, suddenly nervous. "I was wondering, that is, if you're not busy. Would you both like to have dinner with me? After my shift tomorrow?" Emmy bounced in her chair, but Charlotte placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder, studying Walter's face. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. Walter reached into his pocket and carefully withdrew Emmy's drawing. "I found this today," he said, unfolding it. "And it made me realize something." He looked at Emmy, then back at Charlotte. "Marcus would have wanted us to be a family. He would have loved her so much." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled, a real smile that transformed her whole face. "We'd love to have dinner with you," she said. Emmy jumped up and hugged Walter's legs again, and this time, he didn't freeze. Instead, he placed a gentle hand on her curly head, feeling the warmth of her small body against his knees. In that moment, he could almost hear Marcus's voice, approving, guiding him toward this second chance at family. "Tomorrow then," Walter said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'll pick you up at 6. The neon sign of Mama Pearl's Soul Food Kitchen buzzed softly in the evening air. Walter pulled into the small parking lot, his hands tight on the steering wheel. The familiar aroma of fried chicken and collard greens wafted through the air as he helped Emmy out of his old Buick. "Smells like heaven," Charlotte said quietly, adjusting Emmy's jacket. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. The diner was warm and inviting, with red vinyl booths and walls covered in old photos of Pittsburgh. Miss Pearl herself, a round woman with silver hair and kind eyes, looked up from behind the counter. "Walter Jenkins, as I live and breathe." She came around, wiping her, hands on her apron. Haven't seen you in here for months." Walter cleared his throat. "Miss Pearl, I'd like you to meet Charlotte and Emmy." His voice caught slightly on the word Emmy. Miss Pearl's eyes widened as she looked at Emmy, recognition flickering across her face. She'd known Marcus since he was a boy. "Well, aren't you just the prettiest little thing?" she said, recovering quickly. "Y'all take booth 6. That's Walter's favorite." Emmy skipped to the booth, her small patent leather shoes clicking on the checkered floor. She slid in next to Charlotte while Walter took the opposite side, his large frame filling the space. "Grandpa Walt," Emmy said, reaching for a menu with serious concentration. "Can you help me read this?" Walter's breath caught in his throat. The words Grandpa Walt hit him like a gentle wave, washing away years of loneliness. Charlotte watched nervously, but Walter's face softened. "Sure thing, little one," he said, his deep voice tender. "How about we start with the kids' menu?" As they looked over the menus together, Miss Pearl brought them glasses of sweet tea and cornbread. Emmy grabbed a piece immediately, crumbs falling onto her dress. "Emmy," Charlotte started to scold, but Walter chuckled. "Let her be," he said. "Good cornbread's meant to be messy." They ordered fried chicken for Walter, catfish for Charlotte, and chicken tenders for Emmy. As they waited, Emmy pulled out her crayons and began drawing on the paper placemat. "What are you drawing there?" Walter asked, leaning forward. "Our family," Emmy said simply, selecting a brown crayon. "See? That's you, Grandpa Walt, and that's Mommy, and that's me in the middle." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. Walter felt something shift in his chest, like a key turning in a rusty lock. The food arrived steaming hot, and they fell into an easy rhythm of passing plates and sharing bites. Emmy insisted Walter try her mac and cheese, and he pretended it was the best he'd ever tasted, making her giggle. "Marcus used to love Miss Pearl's mac and cheese," Walter said softly, surprising himself. It was the first time he'd mentioned his son's name without pain clouding his voice. Charlotte looked up. "He brought me here once," she admitted. "Said it was the best soul food in Pittsburgh." "He was right about that," Walter said, and they shared a small smile. As they finished their meal, Emmy's head started to droop, her small body swaying with sleepiness. Walter watched as Charlotte gathered their things, her movements careful and efficient, always mindful of her daughter. "Listen," he said, his voice gruff but gentle. "I've been thinking, that shelter's no place for a child." He paused, gathering his courage. "I've got Marcus's old room. It's just sitting there empty. You and Emmy could stay there, just until you get on your feet proper." Charlotte's hands stilled. "Walter, we couldn't possibly." "I'm calling Pastor Glenn tonight to help sort things proper," he continued, his tone brooking no argument. "He'll know how to handle this right." Emmy perked up, despite her tiredness. "We're going to live with Grandpa Walt?" Walter nodded, his throat tight. "If your mama agrees." Charlotte looked at her daughter's hopeful face, then back at Walter. "Are you sure?" "No," he said honestly. "But it's what's right." The ride home was quiet, Emmy falling asleep in the back seat. Walter called Pastor Glenn from the driveway, explaining the situation in low tones while Charlotte carried Emmy inside. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, Walter," Pastor Glenn said warmly. "I'll be over first thing tomorrow to help get everything sorted." Walter stood in his living room later that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of life in his house, Charlotte getting Emmy ready for bed, water running in the bathroom, soft voices through the walls. His son's old room, which had been a shrine to grief for so long, now held his Ani, granddaughter's sleeping form. He sat heavily in his armchair, overwhelmed by the day's events. The thought of being responsible for others again, at his age, made his chest tight with anxiety. He was set in his ways, comfortable in his solitude, yet the sound of Emmy calling him Grandpa Walt echoed in his mind, and he could see Marcus in her smile. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, hesitant. "Walter, I just wanted to say thank you for everything." He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, he found his voice. "We'll figure it out," he said, more to himself than to her, one day at a time. She smiled softly and turned to go, but paused. "Emmy asked me to give you this." She handed him another drawing. This one showed 3 stick figures standing in front of a house, all holding hands and smiling. At the bottom, in wobbly letters, it said, "My family." Walter stared at the drawing long after Charlotte had gone to bed, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he held it. The question loomed large in his mind. Could he really do this? Could he open his heart again, become a grandfather and caretaker at 62? The responsibility felt enormous, the risk of more pain too great. But as he carefully placed Emmy's drawing on his refrigerator, right next to his last photo of Marcus, he realized he'd already made his choice. The house felt different tonight, warmer somehow, as if it had been waiting all these years for this very moment. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. Walter sat at his usual spot, newspaper spread before him, but his eyes kept drifting to the unfamiliar sounds echoing through his once quiet house. Upstairs, Emmy's footsteps pattered back and forth, punctuated by her clear, bell-like voice singing a made-up song about breakfast. Charlotte's softer movements followed, gentle reminders about indoor voices mixing with Emmy's giggles. Walter lifted his coffee mug to his lips, pausing as a loud thump came from above. "Emmy Bell Jenkins," Charlotte's voice carried down the stairs. "What did I say about jumping on the bed?" "Sorry, Mommy." Emmy called back, not sounding sorry at all. Walter's lips twitched. The house hadn't held this much life since Marcus was young. The thought brought its usual ache, but something else too. A warmth he hadn't expected. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun. "I'm so sorry about the noise," she said, wringing her hands. "Emmy's just excited about the new space." "It's fine," Walter said, folding his paper. "House could use some noise." Emmy bounded into the kitchen, her mismatched socks sliding on the floor. "Grandpa Walt, can I have cereal, please?" Walter stood, reaching for the cabinet where he kept the boxes. "Which kind?" "The one with the little stars." Emmy bounced on her toes. "We have plain Cheerios," Walter said, showing her the box. Emmy's face fell, slightly, but she recovered quickly. "That's okay. Mommy says they're healthier anyway." Charlotte moved to the stove. "I could make eggs, if you'd like," she offered, glancing at Walter. "To thank you for letting us stay." "You don't need to," Walter started. "I want to," Charlotte interrupted softly. "Please." Walter nodded, sitting back down. He watched as Charlotte moved around his kitchen, finding pans and utensils with careful precision. Emmy climbed into the chair next to him, her small hands folded on the table. "Mommy makes the best scrambled eggs," she confided. "She puts cheese in them." The kitchen filled with the smell of butter melting in the pan. Charlotte worked quietly, efficiently, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. Walter recognized the behavior, the need to be useful, to justify one's presence. "There's shopping to be done," he said suddenly. "If you're staying here, you should get what you like to eat." Charlotte turned, spatula in hand. "Oh, we couldn't." "I'm not asking." Walter's voice was firm but kind. "Make a list. We'll go after breakfast." Emmy clapped her hands. "Can we get the star cereal?" "Emmy," Charlotte warned, but Walter held up a hand. "One box," he said, "but only if you eat your eggs first." The girl's face lit up. "Deal." They ate breakfast together, the silence comfortable rather than strained. Emmy chatted about her plans to draw pictures for Walter's refrigerator, while Charlotte made neat notes on a shopping list. Later that afternoon, Walter found himself pushing a cart through the grocery store, something he hadn't done in years. Usually, he picked up basics from the corner store or ate at the bus depot cafe. Emmy skipped alongside them, pointing out colorful boxes and fruits she recognized. "Look, Mommy, they have strawberries like at the shelter garden." Charlotte tensed at the mention of the shelter, but Walter pretended not to notice. Instead, he reached for the strawberries. "These look good. You like fruit?" Emmy nodded enthusiastically, especially when Mommy cuts them into hearts. That evening, after Emmy was tucked into bed in Marcus's old room, Walter heard Charlotte in the kitchen. He found her washing dishes, her shoulders tight with anxiety. "You don't have to do that," he said. She jumped slightly. "I want to help." "You're already doing so much, Charlotte." Walter's voice was steady. "Sit down for a minute." She dried her hands slowly, then perched on a kitchen chair. Walter sat across from her, his large hands folded on the table. "This arrangement?" He began. "It's new for all of us." Charlotte nodded, her eyes downcast. "I won't lie. It's strange having people in the house again. Been alone a long time." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But you don't need to walk on eggshells or try to earn your keep every minute." Charlotte's voice wavered. "I don't want to be a burden. After everything that happened with my mother, with Marcus." "You're not your mother," Walter said firmly, "and Emmy." He stopped, emotion catching in his throat. That little girl is as much Marcus as anything I've seen since we lost him. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. Sometimes when she laughs, she sounds just like him. Walter nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The silence stretched between them, filled with shared grief and tentative hope. A small noise from the doorway made them both look up. Emmy stood there in her pajamas, clutching a stuffed rabbit. "I had a bad dream," she whispered. Without hesitation, Walter stood and scooped her up, just as he used to do with Marcus. Emmy wrapped her arms around his neck, her small body warm and trusting against his chest. "Want to tell me about it?" he asked softly. Emmy shook her head, burying her face in his shoulder. "Can you just hold me for a minute?" Walter's heart clenched. He looked at Charlotte, saw his own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. This feeling, this connection, what if it wasn't meant to last? What if something went wrong? What if he lost them too? But Emmy's breath was already evening out against his neck, her small hand clutching his shirt. Some things, he realized, were worth the risk of heartbreak. "I've got you, little one," he murmured. And for that moment at least, it was enough. The old church bells rang through the crisp Sunday morning air as Walter guided his truck into the parking lot. He watched through the rearview mirror as Emmy bounced excitedly in her car seat, her pink dress freshly pressed and her hair done up in neat braids that Charlotte had carefully woven that morning. "Look, Grandpa Walt, the bell is so loud." Emmy's eyes sparkled with wonder. Charlotte sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple blue dress, one of the few nice things she'd managed to bring with her. Walter could see her nervousness in the way she kept smoothing invisible wrinkles from the fabric. "You'll be just fine," Walter said softly as he turned off the engine. "These are good people." The brick church stood proud against the morning sky, its white trim gleaming in the sunlight. As they walked up the steps, Walter noticed how Charlotte's hand trembled slightly as she held Emmy's. He'd been attending this church for over 30 years, but today felt different. Special somehow. Inside, the familiar scent of old hymnals and wood polish wrapped around them. Several early arrivers turned to look, their faces brightening at the sight of Walter with company. Mrs. Johnson, the Sunday school teacher, immediately approached them with a warm smile. "And who do we have here?" she asked, bending down to Emmy's level. "I'm Emmy," the little girl declared, already reaching for Mrs. Johnson's outstretched hand. "Would you like to join our Sunday school class? We're making paper angels today." Emmy looked up at Charlotte with pleading eyes. "Can I, Mama? Please?" Charlotte nodded, and Emmy practically skipped away with Mrs. Johnson, her patent leather shoes clicking against the floor. Walter couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. "She'll be fine," he assured Charlotte. "Mrs. Johnson's been teaching Sunday school longer than I've been, coming here." They found seats in Walter's usual pew, about halfway down the center aisle. People continued filtering in, and Walter found himself making more introductions than he had in years. "This is Charlotte," he'd say. Then after a brief pause, add with growing confidence, "My son's girl." The words felt right on his tongue, like they'd been waiting to be spoken. Miss Gloria, who'd been bringing Walter casseroles since Marcus's passing, stopped to welcome them. "It's so wonderful to see you here, dear," she said to Charlotte, clasping her hand warmly. "Any family of Walter's is family of ours." Charlotte's eyes welled up at that, and Walter pretended not to notice as she dabbed at them with a tissue. The service began with familiar hymns, the congregation's voices rising in harmony. Walter noticed Charlotte didn't know the words, but she swayed gently to the music, a peaceful expression on her face. When Pastor Glenn took the pulpit, his sermon seemed particularly pointed today, speaking about unexpected blessings and the courage to embrace change. Sometimes, Pastor Glenn's rich voice filled the sanctuary. God's greatest gifts come wrapped in ways we never anticipated. Our job isn't to question the packaging, but to open our hearts to receive them. Walter felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. He glanced at Charlotte, who was listening intently, her hands clasped in her lap. After the service, Emmy burst from the Sunday school room, clutching a slightly crooked paper angel. "Look what I made!" She thrust it proudly toward Walter. "Mrs. Johnson says we can hang it up at home." "At home," Walter repeated softly, the words warming something deep inside him. People gathered in, the fellowship hall for coffee and cookies, and Walter watched as Charlotte was welcomed into conversations with other young mothers. She seemed to relax gradually, even laughing at Mrs. Peterson's infamous church cookbook stories. Pastor Glenn made his way over to where Walter stood, watching it all unfold. "She's got a good heart," the pastor said quietly. "And that little girl? She's pure joy." Walter nodded, his throat tight. "She looks just like Marcus when she smiles." "You know," Pastor Glenn continued, "sometimes the Lord works in mysterious ways to heal old wounds and create new beginnings. Don't let fear of what might happen tomorrow stop you from embracing the blessing of today." Walter thought about the past week, the sound of Emmy's laughter echoing through his once quiet house, the smell of Charlotte's cooking in the kitchen, the way his son's old room had come alive again with Emmy's drawings taped to the walls. "My granddaughter," he said, testing the words out loud, to Pastor Glenn. "That's what she is, isn't it? My granddaughter, that she is. Walter, that she is." Pastor Glenn squeezed his shoulder gently. As they prepared to leave, Walter found himself introducing Charlotte to Deacon Williams. "This is my son's girl," he said, the words coming easier now. "And that little whirlwind over there is my granddaughter, Emmy." Emmy was showing her paper angel to anyone who would look, her face beaming with pride. She caught Walter's eye across the room and waved enthusiastically. "Grandpa Walt, can we hang it in the living room?" "Of course we can, sweetheart," he called back, surprising himself with how natural it felt. On the drive home, Emmy chattered about her new friends from Sunday school, while Charlotte sat quietly, a small smile playing at her lips. Walter gripped the steering wheel, feeling something shift inside him, like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. Next Sunday, Emmy announced from the back seat, "Mrs. Johnson says, we're making Noah's Ark, with animals and everything." "Sounds like someone's looking forward to going back," Walter said, catching her eye in the rearview mirror. "Can we, Grandpa Walt? Can we come back next Sunday?" Walter looked at Charlotte, who nodded almost imperceptibly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Yes," he said firmly. "We can come back next Sunday, and the Sunday after that, too." The rest of the drive passed in comfortable silence, broken only by Emmy's occasional humming of the hymns she'd started to learn. Walter couldn't help but notice how the morning sun seemed brighter somehow, how the familiar streets of his neighborhood felt different, more alive, more like home. The morning sun peeked through the kitchen window as Charlotte adjusted her work uniform. Walter sat at the table, sipping his coffee and watching Emmy color in her new activity book. "You sure this is okay?" Charlotte asked, smoothing down her apron. "I know it's a lot, watching her during your morning route." Walter waved away her concern. "Been driving that route 20 years. Having Emmy along will be a nice change." Emmy looked up from her drawing, her curls bouncing. "Can I ring the bell, Grandpa Walt? Pretty please?" "Course you can, sweetheart." His eyes crinkled with a smile. "But only when someone needs to get off, remember?" Charlotte bent down to kiss Emmy's forehead. "Be good for Grandpa Walt, okay? I'll see you both for lunch." The Depot Cafe was just starting to get busy when Charlotte arrived. She tied her apron with practiced movements, falling into the familiar rhythm of brewing coffee and serving breakfast sandwiches. The work wasn't glamorous, but it felt good earning her own money, making her own choices. Meanwhile, Walter helped Emmy climb aboard his empty bus. She immediately ran to her spot, the front seat right behind him. He'd cushioned it with a small pillow from home, and she had her backpack full of books and crayons. "Ready for our morning adventure?" he asked, adjusting his mirrors. "Ready," Emmy saluted, just like he'd taught her. As the morning progressed, regular passengers began boarding. Many of them knew Walter, the older woman who always knitted, the construction workers heading to their site, the nurses changing shifts. They'd grown used to seeing Emmy there too, her cheerful "good morning" brightening their commute. "Who's that little angel?" a new passenger asked, smiling at Emmy. Walter's chest swelled with pride. "That's my granddaughter." Emmy beamed at the word. She'd taken to watching the passengers intently, making up stories about where they were going. Sometimes she'd whisper them to Walter during quiet moments. "That lady's going to bake cookies with her cat," she'd say, or "that man's late for his spaceship." Walter found himself chuckling more than he had in years. Around lunchtime, they pulled into the depot. Charlotte was waiting with 3 paper bags. "Lunch break picnic?" she suggested. They found a quiet spot in the nearby park. Emmy sprawled on the grass between them, telling Charlotte about all the adventures she'd had on the bus. "And Mrs. Peterson gave me a candy." She pulled a wrapped butterscotch from her pocket. "But I saved it for after lunch like you said." Charlotte smiled, but Walter caught the worry in her eyes. She pulled out a thick workbook from her bag. Got my GED study materials yesterday, she said softly. It's a lot. Walter picked up the book, thumbing through the pages. Math giving you trouble? She nodded. Among other things. Been so long since I was in school. Tell you what, Walter said. Emmy and I can help you study after dinner. I may not know much, but I can hold flashcards with the best of them. That evening, they gathered around the kitchen table. Emmy insisted on being the teacher, complete with a pair of toy glasses perched on her nose. Walter and Charlotte took turns helping each other. He'd explain the math problems he remembered from his own schooling, while she helped him understand the newer concepts. Okay, what's 7 times 8? Emmy read from a card, trying to sound stern. 56. Charlotte and Walter answered together, then laughed. As the weeks passed, their evenings fell into a comfortable pattern. Charlotte would cook dinner, simple meals she was learning from Walter's old recipes. Emmy would set the table, proudly counting out the correct number of forks. Walter would come home from his late route to find them waiting, the house warm and full of life. After dinner, they'd tackle Charlotte's studies together. Emmy would eventually drift off on the couch, surrounded by her coloring books. Walter found himself looking forward to these quiet moments, watching Charlotte gain confidence with each small victory. One night, as Charlotte solved a particularly tricky problem, she looked up to find Walter smiling. "What?" she asked. "Just thinking Marcus would be proud," he said softly. "Of both of you." Charlotte's eyes welled up, but her smile was steady. "Thank you. For everything." "Now, don't go getting sentimental on me," Walter grumbled, but his voice was warm. "Let's figure out these fractions." Emmy stirred on the couch, mumbling in her sleep. The clock ticked steadily on the wall. Outside, the city hummed its familiar lullaby. Inside, in this small kitchen with its worn table and mismatched chairs, something new was growing, fragile as a seedling, but reaching toward the light. Walter looked at his makeshift family. Charlotte bent over her studies, Emmy peaceful in sleep, and felt the empty spaces in his heart beginning to fill. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't what he'd planned, but maybe that was okay. Maybe this was exactly where they all needed to be. "Hey," Charlotte said, interrupting his thoughts. "Want to help me with these geometry questions? Emmy's not the only one who needs a best friend around here." Walter chuckled and pulled his chair closer. Together, they bent over the workbook, their shadows merging in the warm kitchen light. The autumn air carried the scent of grilled hot dogs and fresh-baked cookies across the church lawn. Red and orange leaves danced in the gentle breeze as families gathered around picnic tables covered in checkered cloths. Walter stood near the dessert table, carefully arranging a plate of his homemade cookies while keeping one eye on Emmy, who bounced between groups of children playing tag. Charlotte helped Mrs. Johnson, the pastor's wife, set out paper plates and plastic utensils. Her shoulders were more relaxed these days, her smile coming easier. The past few weeks had brought subtle changes to all of them. Walter found himself humming while making breakfast, and the house felt warmer somehow, filled with Emmy's laughter and Charlotte's quiet presence. "Those cookies won't arrange themselves, Walter," Pastor Mike said with a gentle laugh, coming to stand beside him. "You've been moving." The same one back and forth for 5 minutes. Walter chuckled, realizing he'd been lost in thought. "Just making sure they're perfect," he said, straightening his collar. "Perfect isn't what matters," Pastor Mike replied, patting Walter's shoulder. "It's the love that goes into them." Emmy's voice suddenly rang out across the lawn. She had climbed onto one of the wooden benches, her yellow dress catching the sunlight. "My Grandpa Walt makes the best pancakes," she announced to everyone within earshot, throwing her arms wide. "He puts chocolate chips in them and makes them look like Mickey Mouse." The congregation burst into warm applause and laughter. Several people turned to smile at Walter, whose face flushed with unexpected joy. His heart swelled as Emmy beamed with pride, her gap-toothed grin infectious. "That's quite an endorsement," Mrs. Thompson called out from nearby. "We'll have to get that recipe, Walter." Charlotte made her way over to him, her eyes twinkling. "She's been talking about those pancakes all week," she said softly. "I think she's your biggest fan." Walter cleared his throat, trying to hide how touched he was. Well, someone had to teach her what real breakfast looks like. Can't have her thinking cereal is a proper meal. They watched as Emmy jumped down from the bench and rejoined her new friends in a game of freeze tag. Her laughter carried across the lawn, pure and bright. "She's different here," Charlotte observed, crossing her arms against the cool breeze. "More confident. Back there, she was always so quiet, trying not to be noticed." Walter nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. Children need roots to grow, he said simply. Safety to be themselves. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Emmy play. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass, and the air filled with the sounds of conversation and fellowship. Walter noticed how Charlotte no longer flinched when people approached her, how she'd started making eye contact more often. "Thank you," Charlotte said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." Walter shifted his weight, uncomfortable with gratitude but knowing it needed to be acknowledged. "You're doing all the hard work," he replied. "I just make the pancakes." This made Charlotte laugh, a sound that reminded him so much of Marcus it made his chest ache. But it was a different kind of ache now, not just loss, but something new growing in its place. As the evening drew to a close, families began packing up leftovers and folding chairs. Emmy had fallen asleep on a blanket near the dessert table, her face peaceful, one hand still clutching a half-eaten cookie. "I'll get her," Walter said, moving forward before Charlotte could. He gently scooped Emmy up, and she instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck, not waking. Back home, after they'd tucked Emmy into bed, Walter gestured for Charlotte to follow him to the living room. He went to the old, cherry wood cabinet where he kept his most precious memories. "Been meaning to give you something," he said, opening a small drawer. He pulled out a velvet box that had seen better days, its edges worn soft with time. Charlotte sat on the edge of the couch, watching curiously as Walter opened the box. Inside lay a delicate silver bracelet, its links intricately woven. "This belonged to Marcus's grandmother, my mother," Walter explained, his voice growing softer. "She was a strong woman, raised 3 kids on her own after my father passed. Marcus always said he wanted to give it to someone special someday." Charlotte's eyes welled with tears as Walter carefully lifted the bracelet from its box. "I think she'd want you to have it," he said, holding it out. "You're family now, both of you." Charlotte's hands trembled as she accepted the bracelet. She ran her fingers over the silver links, each one carrying decades of history and love. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, tears falling freely now. "Don't need to say anything," Walter replied, his own voice rough with emotion. "Just promise you'll tell Emmy about her great-grandmother someday, about where she comes from." Charlotte nodded, clutching the bracelet to her chest. Walter reached out and awkwardly patted her shoulder, still learning how to navigate these moments of raw emotion. From down the hall, Emmy's sleepy voice called out, "Grandpa, can I have some water?" "Coming, sweetheart," Walter called back, grateful for the interruption. He looked at Charlotte one more time, saw her slipping the bracelet onto her wrist, and knew in his heart that Marcus would approve. As he walked down the hall with a glass of water, Walter heard the quiet tinkling of the bracelet's links, a sound that had once filled his childhood home. It was different now, but somehow right, like an old song being sung by a new voice, carrying the same love forward into another generation. Walter sat in the small waiting room of the law office, his worn leather shoes tapping nervously against the carpeted floor. The walls were lined with dark wood panels and framed certificates, making the space feel both official and intimidating. Charlotte perched on the edge of her chair beside him, fidgeting with the bracelet he'd given her, Marcus's grandmother's silver piece that now seemed to catch the light whenever she moved. Emmy sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, completely absorbed in her coloring book. Her small hand moved carefully as she filled in the outline of a butterfly, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. The sight made Walter's heart squeeze with familiar warmth. "Mr. Jenkins?" A young secretary appeared in the doorway. "Miss Peterson will see you now." Walter stood, straightening his tie, the same one he'd worn to church on Sunday. "Come on, Emmy girl," he said softly. "Time to go talk to the nice lawyer lady." Emmy gathered her crayons into their box with careful precision, a habit that reminded him so much of Marcus it nearly took his breath away. Charlotte helped her, and together they followed Walter into the office. Miss Peterson was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. She gestured to the chairs in front of her desk. "Please, have a seat. Emmy, would you like to keep coloring at that table over there?" Emmy nodded and settled at a small side table, immediately returning to her artwork. "Now then, Miss," Peterson began, opening a manila folder. "I understand you're interested in becoming Emmy's temporary legal guardian, Mr. Jenkins?" Walter cleared his throat. "Yes, ma'am. Charlotte here needs to focus on getting her GED and working full-time. I want to help make that possible." Charlotte's eyes widened slightly, They hadn't discussed the details before coming here. She'd known Walter wanted to help, but hearing him state it so plainly made her throat tight with emotion. Miss Peterson nodded, making notes. "And you're Emmy's biological grandfather, correct? Through your late son?" "Yes, ma'am. My son, Marcus. He never knew about Emmy. He was killed in Afghanistan 5 years ago." Walter's voice remained steady, but his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The lawyer's expression softened. "I see. And Miss Bell, you're in agreement with this arrangement?" Charlotte sat up straighter. "Yes, absolutely. Walter, Mr. Jenkins, he's been more than generous, taking us in, helping us get back on our feet. Emmy adores him." As if on cue, Emmy held up her finished picture. "Look, Grandpa Walt, I made it for you." Walter's face creased into a smile. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. We'll put it right up on the fridge when we get home." Miss Peterson watched the interaction with approval. "Well, the process isn't overly complicated, but it will take some time. We'll need to file a petition with the family court, get background checks completed, and have a home study done." She pulled out several forms and began explaining each one. Walter listened intently, asking careful questions about his responsibilities and rights. Charlotte noticed how he leaned forward slightly, taking in every detail, the same way he approached learning new bus routes or helping Emmy with her reading. The whole process usually takes about 3 to 4 months, Miss Peterson concluded. During that time, you'll need to demonstrate that you can provide a stable home environment and meet Emmy's needs. Walter nodded solemnly. "I understand. Whatever needs to be done." As they worked through the initial paperwork, Emmy wandered over and climbed into Walter's lap, something she'd started doing more frequently lately. She nestled against his chest, her small hands playing with his tie clip, the one Marcus had given him years ago. The simple gesture hit Walter like a lightning bolt of recognition. Every day, Emmy did something that reminded him of Marcus. The way she scrunched her nose when thinking hard, how she got her, arranged her food on her plate, even her laugh. It was all Marcus. She wasn't just his son's child, she was a living connection to him, a precious gift he never expected to receive. Charlotte watched as Walter's eyes grew misty, his large hand gently smoothing Emmy's curls. She knew that look, had seen it more and more lately when he thought no one was watching. It was the look of a man whose heart was healing, piece by piece. After they finished the preliminary forms, Miss Peterson walked them to the door. "I'll be in touch once I file these with the court. In the meantime, just continue as you have been. From what I can see, you're already doing everything right." Outside the office, Charlotte turned to Walter, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I don't know how to thank you for this, what you're doing for us, for Emmy." Walter shook his head, adjusting Emmy on his hip where she'd asked to be carried. "No need for thanks. This is what family does." He paused, looking down at Emmy's sleepy face against his shoulder. "Besides, she's given me back something I thought I'd lost forever." Charlotte tilted her head questioningly. "Hope," Walter said simply, "and a piece of Marcus I never knew existed." His voice roughened slightly. "Every time I look at her, I see him. In the little things she does, the way she thinks, even how she folds her napkin just like he used to. It's like," he cleared his throat, "it's like getting to know my son all over again, through her eyes." Emmy stirred slightly, mumbling something about butterflies in her half-sleep. Walter adjusted his hold, and Charlotte noticed how natural it looked now. This tall, once lonely man cradling his granddaughter as if he'd been doing it all his life. The three of them walked to Walter's car, the afternoon sun warming their backs. As Charlotte helped Emmy into her car seat, Walter stood for a moment, keys in hand, thinking about the path that had led them here. From that rainy Monday when a tearful young woman boarded his bus without a ticket, to this moment, signing papers to become a grandfather in the eyes of the law, just as he'd already become one in his heart. Emmy's sleepy voice floated from the back seat. "Can we have pancakes for dinner, Grandpa Walt?" Walter chuckled, the sound warm and rich. "Sure thing, Emmy girl, sure thing." The November wind whistled through the bare trees as Walter stood at his kitchen window, watching the first snowflakes of the season drift lazily to the ground. The smell of pumpkin pie and roasting turkey filled the house, mixing with the warm scent of cinnamon and fresh bread. "Need any help with those potatoes?" he asked, turning to watch Charlotte expertly peel another spud, her movements quick and precise. "I've got it under control." She smiled, dropping the peeled potato into a pot of water. "But you could check on Emmy. She's been awfully quiet in the living room." Walter nodded, wiping his hands on the dish, towel hanging from his belt. As he walked into the living room, he found Emmy sprawled on her stomach, surrounded by colored paper and crayons. Her tongue stuck out slightly as she concentrated on her drawing. "What are you working on there, sugar?" Walter asked, lowering himself onto the couch with a slight groan. Emmy's face lit up. "Place cards for dinner. See?" She held up a piece of folded paper with Mrs. Johnson from church, written in wobbly letters, decorated with hearts and flowers. "That's mighty fine work," Walter praised, his heart warming at her thoughtfulness. He glanced at the growing pile beside her, enough for all 12 guests they'd invited. The doorbell chimed, and Emmy jumped up. "They're here." "Hold on now," Walter chuckled. "It's probably just Miss Rita from next door. She said she'd come early to help." Sure enough, Rita Johnson stood on the porch, clutching a covered casserole dish. Her silver hair was neatly styled, and she wore her Sunday best, a purple dress with a matching cardigan. "Walter Jenkins, your house smells like heaven itself," Rita declared as she stepped inside. She handed the dish to Walter and immediately scooped Emmy up in a hug. "And there's my favorite little artist." The next hour was a flurry of activity as more guests arrived. Bob and Mary Thompson from church brought their famous green bean casserole. 3 of Walter's fellow bus drivers, Jim, Pedro, and Sarah, showed up together, carrying bottles of sparkling cider and homemade rolls, the house filled with cheerful voices and laughter. Charlotte moved through the kitchen with quiet confidence, directing helpers and putting final touches on dishes. Walter noticed how different she looked from that first day on his bus. Her eyes were bright now, her shoulders straight, her smile genuine and frequent. "Dinner's ready," Charlotte called out finally, and everyone began moving toward the dining room. Walter had borrowed 2 folding tables from the church to accommodate everyone, and Charlotte had covered them with crisp white tablecloths. Emmy's handmade place cards guided everyone to their seats. The table was a sight to behold. The golden brown turkey sat in the center, surrounded by all the traditional fixings: mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, stuffing, and various vegetable dishes. Candlelight flickered across the faces of their guests, creating a warm, intimate atmosphere. Before anyone could start filling their plates, Emmy tugged on Walter's sleeve. "Grandpa, Walt, aren't you supposed to say something, like at church?" A hush fell over the table as everyone turned expectantly toward Walter. He cleared his throat, suddenly emotional as he looked at the faces around him, friends who'd become family, and family he never knew he had. "Well," he began, his deep voice slightly rough, "I'm not much for speeches, but this year I've learned something important about blessings." He paused, his hand finding Emmy's small one, under the table. "Sometimes they come in ways we never expected. Sometimes they show up on your bus on a rainy Monday morning." A few knowing chuckles rippled around the table. Charlotte dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. "5 months ago, I was a lonely old man, set in my ways," Walter continued. "Now, thanks to these 2 special ladies," he squeezed Emmy's hand and smiled at Charlotte, "my house is full of light again, full of love." Before he could continue, Emmy jumped up on her chair, her curls bouncing with excitement. "And he's the best grandpa in the whole wide world," she announced proudly. The room erupted in applause and laughter. Charlotte tried to get Emmy to sit down properly, but her face glowed with joy. Walter felt his own eyes growing misty as his neighbors and friends nodded in agreement with Emmy's assessment. "To family," Bob Thompson called out, raising his glass, "both the ones we're born with and the ones we find along the way." "To family," everyone echoed, clinking their glasses together. The evening flowed like honey after that, sweet and warm. Stories were shared between bites of turkey and spoonfuls of Charlotte's homemade cranberry sauce. Pedro regaled everyone with tales from his early days as a bus driver, while Rita shared memories of Walter's son, Marcus, from when he was Emmy's age. Emmy moved from lap to lap throughout dinner, charming everyone with her stories and questions. She seemed especially fascinated by Sarah's earrings, which sparkled in the candlelight. When it was time for dessert, Charlotte brought out 3 different pies: pumpkin, apple, and pecan. "I couldn't decide which one to make," she admitted with a laugh, "so I made all 3. "And we're mighty glad you did," Jim said, already eyeing the pecan pie. As plates were passed and coffee was poured, Walter sat back in his chair, taking in the scene before him. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter. Emmy was attempting to teach Mrs. Johnson a complicated clapping game. Charlotte was deep in conversation with Mary Thompson about her upcoming GED exam. Rita leaned over to Walter, patting his hand. "Marcus would be so proud," she whispered. "Of all of this." Walter nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He thought of his son, of all the Thanksgivings they'd shared in this very room. Somehow, he knew Rita was right. Marcus would have loved seeing his home filled with people again, would have been overjoyed to know his daughter and Charlotte had found their way here. The evening continued with more stories, more laughter, and second helpings of pie. When Emmy fell asleep on the living room floor, surrounded by her crayons and half-finished drawings, Walter carefully picked her up and settled her on the couch, covering her with the afghan his mother had crocheted years ago. Looking at her peaceful face, Walter silently gave thanks for unexpected blessings and second chances at love. The December afternoon had started peacefully enough. Walter sat in his armchair, helping Emmy practice writing her letters, while Charlotte prepared lunch in the kitchen. The scratch of Emmy's pencil and the gentle clinking of dishes created a homey symphony that had become wonderfully familiar over the past weeks. "Look, Grandpa Walt." Emmy held up her paper proudly. "I wrote my whole name." Walter leaned forward, adjusting his reading glasses. "Well, would you look at that? Emmy Bell Jenkins in perfect print." He ruffled her curly hair, his heart warming at her beaming smile. The peaceful moment shattered at the sound of tires crunching on the snow-dusted driveway. Walter glanced out the window and felt his stomach drop. A sleek black Mercedes had pulled up, its polished surface reflecting the weak winter sunlight. "Charlotte," he called out, his voice tight, "you might want to come here." The kitchen sound stopped. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a dish towel. "What's wrong?" The worry in her voice was immediate. She knew that tone. Before Walter could answer, sharp knocks echoed through the house. Emmy jumped, her pencil clattering to the floor. "Stay here with Emmy," Walter said quietly to Charlotte, who had gone pale. He moved to the front door, his old military training kicking in, straight back, squared shoulders, ready for confrontation. When he opened the door, Rosemary Bell stood on his porch like an ice sculpture in an expensive wool coat. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, but her eyes were cold with fury. "Mr. Jenkins." Her voice dripped with disdain. "I should have known you'd be involved in this situation." "Mrs. Bell." Walter's response was clipped but controlled. "This is private property. Where's my daughter?" Rosemary tried to peer past him into the house. "Charlotte, I know you're in there." Charlotte appeared behind Walter, her hands trembling but her chin lifted. "Mother, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" Rosemary's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "I've spent months tracking you down, only to find you living in this." She gestured dismissively at Walter's modest home. "Place? With him of all people?" "This is my home," Walter said firmly, "and you're not welcome here." "Your home?" Rosemary's eyes narrowed. "You mean where you've manipulated my vulnerable daughter and my granddaughter into staying after everything our family has been through because of you?" Charlotte stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her to shield Emmy from the confrontation. "He hasn't manipulated anyone, Mother. Walter has shown us nothing but kindness. Something you wouldn't understand." "Kindness?" Rosemary spat the word. "Wake up, Charlotte. He's using you to get back at me for that ancient business with the theft accusation. He's probably been planning this revenge for years." "That's enough," Walter's voice thundered across the porch. "You don't get to come here and spread your poison. Charlotte and Emmy are family, Marcus's family." "Marcus?" Rosemary's face contorted. "That boy who got Charlotte pregnant and then conveniently died in Afghanistan?" Charlotte gasped, as if she'd been slapped. "How dare you? Marcus was a hero who died serving his country. He was Emmy's father, and Walter is her grandfather." "He is nothing of the sort." Rosemary's composure cracked. "I've already contacted my lawyers. We'll see what the courts have to say about a young, unemployed mother living with an unrelated elderly man. Do you really think they'll choose him over me? I can provide Emmy with everything. The best schools, the finest opportunities. What can he offer except a bus driver's pension?" "Love," Charlotte said quietly. "He offers love, support, and acceptance. Everything you never gave me." "Don't be dramatic, Charlotte." Rosemary reached into her designer handbag and pulled out an envelope. "This is your last chance. Come home with me now, bring Emmy, and we'll forget this foolishness otherwise." She waved the envelope. "I'll file for emergency custody first thing tomorrow morning. You know I'll win." Walter stepped forward, placing himself between Charlotte and her mother. "You're threatening your own daughter? Your own granddaughter? I'm protecting them from you," Rosemary snapped. "Charlotte, I'm not leaving without an answer." "Grandpa Walt?" a small voice called from inside. "Why is everyone yelling?" The color drained from Charlotte's face. She turned back toward the door, but Rosemary was faster. She pushed past Walter and yanked the door open. Emmy stood in the hallway, her letter practice forgotten, tears welling in her big brown eyes, Marcus's eyes. "Emmy, darling," Rosemary's voice switched to honey sweet. "Come here and give grandmother a proper hello." Emmy backed away, moving closer to Walter. "I don't want to." "Emmy," Charlotte said softly, "go to your room, sweetheart. Please. You can't keep her from me." Rosemary's mask slipped again. "She's my granddaughter, and I'll see her whenever I want." She took a step toward Emmy, but Walter moved between them. "Get out of my house," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Now." Rosemary straightened her coat, her hands shaking with rage. "Fine, but this isn't over. Not by a long shot." She slapped the envelope against Walter's chest. "Expect to hear from my lawyers. Soon." She turned to Charlotte. "You're making a terrible mistake. Don't come crying to me when it all falls apart." She clicked down the porch steps in her expensive boots, back to her waiting car. The Mercedes roared to life and peeled away, leaving black tire marks on the snow-covered street. Charlotte crumpled against the wall, her face in her hands. Emmy ran to her, wrapping her small arms around her mother's waist. Walter picked up the envelope that had fallen to the floor, his hands unsteady as he opened it. Legal papers spilled out, custody filings, character, testimonies, financial statements, a declaration of unfitness, a demand for immediate removal of the child from the premises. The peaceful afternoon was gone, shattered like ice in a spring thaw. Walter looked at Charlotte holding Emmy, both of them trembling, and felt the weight of history pressing down on him once again. The Bell family had taken something precious from him once before. He wouldn't let it happen again. But as he watched Charlotte trying to comfort Emmy while fighting back her own tears, he wondered if he had the strength for this fight. The law, money, influence, it was all on Rosemary's side. All they had was love, truth, and each other. In the heavy silence that followed Rosemary's departure, Emmy's small voice spoke up. "I don't want to go anywhere, Grandpa Walt. Please don't let her take us away." Walter knelt down beside them, pulling both Charlotte and Emmy into his arms. The legal papers lay scattered on the floor around them, their threatening words, a stark contrast to the warmth of their embrace. The waiting room at Peterson and Associates felt too small, its beige walls closing in as Walter sat stiffly in an uncomfortable chair. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking each passing second. Charlotte perched next to him, her hands twisted together in her lap. Emmy was safe at the church daycare, surrounded by familiar faces and distractions. "Mr. Jenkins?" A young legal assistant emerged from the hallway. "Mr. Peterson will see you now." They followed her into a modest office where James Peterson, a middle-aged lawyer with kind eyes and graying temples, stood to greet them. Walter had known him through church for years, though they'd never needed each other's professional services until now. "Walter, Charlotte, please sit down." James gestured to the chairs across from his desk. His usual warm smile was replaced by a concerned frown. "I've reviewed the situation, and I want to be completely honest with you both." Walter's stomach tightened. "Give it to us straight, James." The lawyer opened a thick folder. "Rosemary Bell has already filed for emergency custody of Emmy. She's claiming Charlotte is an unfit mother due to unstable living conditions and lack of financial resources." He paused, letting that sink in. "She's also painting you, Walter, as someone with a questionable past who's harboring her daughter and granddaughter without proper legal authority." Charlotte's face crumpled. "She's twisting everything around. We're not hiding. We're building a life." "I understand," James said gently, "but Mrs. Bell has considerable resources at her disposal. She's hired Caldwell and Wright, one of the most expensive family law firms in Pittsburgh. They're known for aggressive tactics." Walter's jaw clenched. "Money shouldn't decide who raises a child." "It shouldn't," James agreed, "but it can certainly complicate things. Mrs. Bell can afford to drag this out, file motion after motion. She's already requesting an emergency hearing next week." Charlotte's voice shook. "What do we do?" James leaned forward. "We fight smart. First, we need character references, lots of them. From your church community, neighbors, employers. We need to show that Emmy is thriving in your care. Walter nodded. I'll start making calls today. Good. Charlotte, we'll need documentation of your work history, your GED progress, everything showing you're working to provide stability. James made notes as he spoke. Walter, your steady employment and home ownership are strong points in our favor. We'll emphasize the family connection through Marcus. Charlotte wiped her eyes. What about Emmy? Will she have to testify? The judge may want to speak with her in chambers, but we'll try to shield her from as much as possible. James's expression softened. How is she handling all this? She's scared, Walter said quietly. Keeps asking if the mean lady is going to take her away. James nodded, sympathetically. Children are perceptive. Keep her routine as normal as possible. Show her she's safe and loved. They spent the next hour going over strategy. By the time they left, Walter's head was spinning with legal terms and action items. Outside, the winter air bit at their faces as they walked to his car. I can't lose her, Charlotte whispered, her breath visible in the cold. I won't let my mother destroy another family. Walter stopped and turned to face her. Listen to me. We're going to fight this together. Emmy belongs with us, her real family. Your mother might have money and fancy lawyers, but we have truth on our side. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry I brought all this trouble to your door. Don't you apologize. Walter's voice was firm but gentle. You and Emmy are the best thing that's happened to me since losing Marcus. We're family now, and family stands together. They drove to the church to pick up Emmy. The little girl's face lit up when she saw them, and she ran straight into Walter's arms. Grandpa Walt, I made you a picture. Walter lifted her up, holding her close. You did? Well, I can't wait to see it. It's our whole family. Emmy proudly held up her crayon drawing. See, there's you, and Mommy, and me, and our house, and even Marcus in heaven watching us. Charlotte's breath caught. Walter had to swallow hard before speaking. It's beautiful, sweetheart. How about we hang it on the fridge when we get home? That evening, while Emmy played with her dolls in the living room, Walter made calls. His pastor promised to gather support letters from the congregation. His supervisor at the bus company immediately offered to write about Walter's character and reliability. Neighbors who'd watched Emmy playing in the yard agreed to testify about the happy, well-adjusted child they saw every day. As Walter hung up from his last call, he heard Emmy's small voice from the doorway. Grandpa Walt? Yes, baby girl? Are you? And Mommy sad because of the mean lady? Walter patted his knee, and Emmy climbed into his lap. We're not sad, honey. We're just working hard to make sure you stay right here where you belong. With you? With me and your mommy, yes. Emmy wrapped her arms around his neck. Good, 'cause I don't want to go anywhere else. You make the best pancakes, and you tell the best stories about Daddy, and you give the best hugs. Walter held her tighter, his heart full of fierce love and determination. In the kitchen doorway, Charlotte watched them with tears streaming down her face. Walter extended his hand to her, and she joined their embrace. We're gonna be okay, Walter said firmly, holding his family close. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Later that night, after Emmy was asleep, Walter sat at his kitchen table with a stack of papers. Charlotte's GED study guides, Emmy's daycare records, the photo of Marcus that now held pride of place on the mantle, evidence of their life. Together, proof of their love. He thought about Rosemary Bell with her wealth and her threats. She might have money and influence, but she didn't have what mattered most, the truth of who Emmy's real family was, and the strength of their bond. Walter picked up his pen and began writing his own statement for the court, pouring out his heart about the unexpected joy of becoming a grandfather, about watching Emmy grow and Charlotte heal, about the second chance at family he'd never dreamed possible. His words flowed steady and true, like the love that had brought them all together. The courthouse loomed over them like a giant made of stone and steel. Walter straightened his tie, a gift from Marcus years ago, as they walked through the heavy wooden doors. Charlotte held Emmy's hand tight, her knuckles white with worry. Inside the courtroom, Rosemary Bell sat like royalty, her silver hair perfectly styled, her navy suit crisp and expensive. Her lawyer, a man with wire-rimmed glasses, and a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Walter's monthly salary, shuffled through papers with practiced efficiency. The judge, a woman with kind eyes but a stern expression, called the hearing to order. Walter's heart pounded as she reviewed the case files. Until a final determination can be made, the judge announced, her voice echoing in the quiet room, Emmy Bell Jenkins will remain in her mother's custody. However, due to concerns raised by Mrs. Bell's counsel about unsupervised contact, there will be temporary restrictions. Emmy squirmed in her seat between Walter and Charlotte. The little girl's butterfly hair clips caught the fluorescent light, reminding Walter of how she'd insisted on wearing them today because they were fancy like court. Mr. Jenkins, the judge continued, looking directly at Walter, you are prohibited from having Emmy on your bus route or any unsupervised contact until the final hearing. All visits must be monitored by approved parties. The words hit Walter like a physical blow. He watched Emmy's lower lip tremble as Charlotte tried to explain in whispers what this meant. But Grandpa Wald tells the best stories on the bus? Emmy protested, her voice carrying across the courtroom. He does different voices for everyone. Emmy, honey, Charlotte whispered. We have to follow the rules, for now. Rosemary's satisfied smile from across the aisle made Walter's jaw clench. That evening, their usually warm home felt cold, despite the heat running. Emmy's coloring books lay untouched on the coffee table. Her favorite cup, decorated with dancing pandas, sat empty in the dish rack. The silence was deafening. Charlotte paced the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear. Yes, I understand. No, I can't work those hours anymore. I need to be home when Emmy gets out of school. Please, I just need some flexibility. Walter watched her shoulders slump as she hung up. They cut my hours, she said softly. Said they need someone with more availability. We'll figure it out, Walter assured her. Though his own heart felt heavy, I've got some savings. That night, after Charlotte had tucked Emmy into bed, Walter sat in his old armchair, holding Marcus's voice recorder. It was a small thing, black and simple, that his son had used to record letters home during his deployment. Walter pressed the red button, watching the little light blink to life. Emmy, he began, his voice rough with emotion. This is your Grandpa Walt. I was thinking about the time we saw that family of ducks crossing the street on my route. He smiled at the memory. You remember? Mama Duck leading her babies, and you counted them all out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And when that last little duckling was struggling to keep up, you got so worried. He paused, clearing his throat. But that Mama Duck, she waited. Wouldn't move forward until her whole family was together. That's what family does. Emmy girl, we wait for each other. We stick together. The next morning felt wrong without Emmy's morning routine of checking the weather through the kitchen window or her excited chatter about which passengers they might see today. Walter drove his route with an empty feeling in his chest, the seat where Emmy usually perched, now occupied by strangers. Days began to blur together. Charlotte spent her mornings searching for new jobs that would accommodate her schedule. Walter recorded more stories each night, tales about Marcus as a boy, about the kind passengers on his route, about the neighborhood cats Emmy loved to name. Remember that rainy Tuesday, he recorded one evening? When you spotted that rainbow from the bus window? You told everyone who got on about it, even Mr. Thompson, who never smiles, couldn't help grinning when you explained how rainbows are made of sunshine and rain having a party. The house grew quieter. Charlotte's eyes carried dark circles beneath them. Walter caught her sometimes, late at night, sitting in Emmy's room, holding one of the little girl's stuffed animals. They were all fighting battles with silence. During Sunday service, Emmy would wave frantically from her spot next to Charlotte, and Walter would wave back, his heart both lifting and breaking at how she had to stay at arm's length. The pastor's wife started organizing supervised visits in the church playground after service, where Walter could at least hear Emmy's laughter, even if he couldn't take her for ice cream or show her the ducks anymore. Your dad? Walter recorded one night, his voice soft in the darkness. He used to say that the hardest part of being away wasn't the distance, it was missing the little moments. The everyday magic, he called it. I understand that now, Emmy girl. I miss our morning talks about what shapes the clouds make. I miss helping you count the stops until we reach the park. I miss your drawings of all the people you meet on the bus. He clicked stop, then play, listening to his own voice tell stories into the night. Each recording became a bridge across the distance they couldn't cross, a promise that this separation wasn't forever, that family, real family, found ways to keep love alive even when apart. Charlotte found him one evening surrounded by old photos he'd dug out of storage. What are you doing? She asked softly. Making memory cards? Walter explained, showing her how he was writing dates and stories on the backs of pictures. For Emmy, so she knows where she comes from. So she remembers that being apart doesn't mean being alone. Charlotte sat beside him, picking up a photo of Marcus in his graduation cap. She asks about him every night now. Wants to know if her daddy liked ice cream as much as she does, if he could whistle like you can. What do you tell her? The truth. Charlotte smiled sadly. That he loved chocolate ice cream with rainbow sprinkles, just like she does. That he couldn't whistle to save his life, but he couldn't whistle. Could make the best animal noises that would make everyone laugh. Walter pressed record again. Emmy, let me tell you about the time your daddy tried to teach himself to whistle. The story poured out, filling the quiet house with memories, building a bridge between now and then, between here and there, between the family they were and the family they were fighting to remain. The kitchen clock ticked past midnight, its soft rhythm the only sound in Walter's dimly lit home. Charlotte sat at the kitchen table, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. A half-empty cup of tea had gone cold beside her, forgotten. Walter found her there when he came down for a glass of water, her face buried in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, quickly wiping her eyes. "I didn't mean to wake you." Walter pulled out a chair and sat down beside her. The wooden legs scraped against the floor, breaking the midnight silence. "You didn't wake me. I was already up." Charlotte's fingers trembled as she traced the rim of her teacup. "This is all my fault. I should never have come back here. I've ruined everything. Your peace, your routine." Her voice cracked. "Now my mother's trying to take Emmy away, and it's because I was selfish enough to think we could have this family." Walter watched her for a long moment, his weathered face softening with understanding. The kitchen light cast warm shadows across the walls, where Emmy's crayon drawings hung like precious artwork. "Charlotte," he said gently, "look at me." She raised her tear-stained face, meeting his steady gaze. "You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever," Walter said, his deep voice thick with emotion. "When Marcus died, I thought that was it. No more family, no more chances. Just me and my memories?" He gestured to the drawings on the wall. "But then you brought Emmy into my life, that little girl. She's like sunshine after a storm." Charlotte wiped fresh tears with the back of her hand. "But now, everything's falling apart." Walter stood up slowly, his joints creaking. "Wait here," he said. He walked to his bedroom and opened the closet, reaching for a weathered cardboard box on the top shelf. It was marked simply Marcus in faded black marker. Inside were photos, medals, and letters, pieces of his son's life carefully preserved. As he moved things aside, his fingers brushed against an envelope he didn't recognize. It was unopened, the paper slightly yellowed with age. Back in the kitchen, Charlotte watched as Walter sat down and held up the envelope. "I've never seen this before," he said, turning it over in his hands. "It's from Marcus." Charlotte leaned forward, her eyes wide. The postmark showed it was from Afghanistan, dated just weeks before Marcus died. With careful movements, Walter opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. His hands trembled slightly as he began to read aloud. "Dear Dad, I know I usually call instead of writing, but some things are easier to say on paper. Today I watched a local family in the village, a father playing with his kids, teaching them to kick a soccer ball. It reminded me of all those afternoons you spent teaching me basketball, even after working double shifts. I've been thinking a lot about family lately, about the kind of father I want to be someday. Everyone here talks about their kids, shows pictures, shares stories, and I realized that everything I know about being a good father, I learned from you. You showed me what it means to put family first, to be strong but gentle, firm but fair. Even after Mom passed, you never let your grief keep you from being there for me. You made sure I had everything I needed, not just food and shelter, but love, guidance, and understanding. I want that, Dad. Someday, I want to build a family like you built for me. I want to be the kind of father you are, someone my kids can count on, someone who shows up every day, someone who loves without conditions. There's so much more I want to say, but duty calls. I'll try to call next week. Love, Marcus." Walter's voice grew quiet as he finished reading. The letter trembled in his hands. Charlotte reached across the table and squeezed his arm, her own tears falling freely now. "He would have been so proud," Walter said, looking up at her. "Proud of Emmy, proud of you for being strong enough to break free and give her a better life." Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. "You really think so?" "I know so." Walter carefully folded the letter and set it on the table. "Marcus wanted a family built on love and understanding. That's exactly what you're fighting for, what we're all fighting for." Through her tears, Charlotte managed a small smile. Sometimes I see him in Emmy's eyes. The way she looks at the world with such hope. Me too, Walter nodded. And that's why we can't give up. Your mother, she's fighting with money and influence. But we're fighting with love, the kind of love Marcus wrote about, the proper the road, kind that shows up every day, that puts family first. Charlotte straightened in her chair, wiping her eyes one final time. The weight of guilt that had been crushing her seemed to lift slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for sharing the letter, for everything." Walter stood and pulled her into a gentle hug, the kind of embrace that only a father could give. "You and Emmy aren't just Marcus's legacy," he said softly. "You're my family now, and family doesn't give up on family." Through the kitchen window, the first hints of dawn began to color the sky. A new day was coming, bringing its own challenges. But in that quiet moment, surrounded by Emmy's drawings and Marcus's words, they found strength in the family they had built together. The courthouse hallway buzzed with quiet conversation as Walter straightened his tie for the third time. He'd polished his old service medals and pinned them carefully to his best suit jacket, the one he usually saved for church. Charlotte stood beside him in a simple blue dress, clutching her worn leather purse like a shield. "You okay?" Walter asked softly. Charlotte managed a small nod. "Just nervous." She glanced down the marble hallway where Emmy sat between two church ladies, coloring in a book. Their lawyer, Mr. Peterson, approached with a reassuring smile. "We're ready. Remember what we discussed. Just be honest and speak from the heart." The courtroom doors opened, and they filed in. Rosemary Bell sat at the opposite table, perfectly composed in an expensive cream suit, her silver hair arranged just so. She didn't look at Charlotte. Judge Margaret Wilson adjusted her glasses as she reviewed the papers before her. "This is a custody hearing regarding Emmy Bell, Mrs. Rosemary Bell has petitioned for full custody of her granddaughter." She looked up. "I understand the defense has character witnesses?" Mr. Peterson stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We'd first like to present a letter into evidence." He held up the weathered envelope. This was written by Marcus Jenkins, Emmy's biological father, before his death in Afghanistan. It was recently discovered among Mr. Jenkins' belongings. Walter's throat tightened as Mr. Peterson began to read. "Dear Dad, if you're reading this, something happened to me over here. There's so much I want to say. You taught me what it means to be a good man, not through words, but by example. Every time I work with the local kids here, I think about how you raised me, how you never gave up, even when it was just the two of us. I dream about having a family of my own someday, the kind of family you gave me, built on love, respect, and doing what's right. You showed me that family isn't just about blood. It's about who stays by your side, who fights for you, who believes in you even when the world doesn't. I hope I made you proud, Dad. Love, Marcus." The courtroom was silent when Mr. Peterson finished. Walter blinked hard, and Charlotte reached over to squeeze his hand. Next, Pastor Roberts took the stand, his kind face serious. "I've known Walter Jenkins for 20 years. He's been a pillar of our church community, always the first to help others. Since Emmy and Charlotte came into his life, I've seen him transform. The joy in that child's eyes when she sees her grandfather, you can't fake that kind of love." Mrs. Johnson, a regular on Walter's bus route for 15 years, spoke next. "Walter's the kind of driver who knows everyone's name, notices when someone's having a bad day. When Emmy started riding with him, it was like watching a flower bloom. She'd tell everyone, 'That's my Grandpa Walt,' and he'd just beam with pride." Colonel Stevens, Walter's former commanding officer, testified about Walter's character. "In the service, you learn quick who you can trust with your life. Walter Jenkins is that kind of man. Honest, dependable, puts others before himself. When he lost his son, it broke something in him. But these past months with Emmy, I've seen my old friend come back to life." Throughout the testimony, Judge Wilson watched carefully, occasionally making notes. Her eyes moved between Walter's earnest face and Rosemary's rigid posture. More witnesses followed. The ladies from the church quilting circle who helped Charlotte study for her GED, veterans who served with Marcus, neighbors who spoke about the sounds of children's laughter returning to Walter's house. When it was Rosemary's turn, her testimony felt rehearsed, focused on financial stability and social status. "I can provide Emmy with the best schools, proper connections, the right opportunities," she said crisply. "It's what any grandmother would want." "And what about love?" Judge Wilson asked quietly. "What about emotional support?" Rosemary straightened. "I can hire the finest nannies." That's not what I asked, Mrs. Bell. The contrast was stark. Rosemary's cold efficiency against the warm web of community support surrounding Walter and Charlotte. When Emmy was briefly brought in to speak with the judge in chambers, she ran to hug Walter first, calling out Grandpa without hesitation. Judge Wilson's expression softened as she watched the interaction. Even the court reporter smiled behind her machine. Later, during closing statements, Mr. Peterson held up Marcus's letter again. Your Honor, this case isn't about wealth or status. It's about family, real family. The kind that forms not just through blood, but through love, choice, and sacrifice. Walter Jenkins has created a home where both his granddaughter and her mother can heal, grow, and be surrounded by genuine care and community support. Walter sat straight-backed in his chair, every inch the soldier he'd once been, but his eyes were gentle as they rested on Emmy. Charlotte leaned slightly against his shoulder, drawing strength from his steady presence. The courtroom was packed with their supporters, a living testament to the family they'd built together. Through it all, Rosemary sat alone at her table, her lawyer beside her, but no one else in her corner. Her perfect posture couldn't hide her isolation, and for the first time, there was uncertainty in her eyes as she watched the obvious bonds between Walter, Charlotte, and Emmy. The morning sun painted Walter's kitchen in warm, golden light as he stirred his coffee, the familiar aroma failing to calm his restless nerves. A week had crawled by since the final court hearing, each day feeling like a month. The house felt too quiet without Emmy's cheerful chatter and Charlotte's gentle presence. He glanced at the clock for the 100th time. 9:43 a.m. Their lawyer had promised to call the moment the judge made her decision. Walter's weathered hands trembled slightly as he set down his coffee mug. The past 7 days had been filled with prayer and sleepless nights, his thoughts constantly returning to Emmy's tearful face as they'd left the courthouse. The phone rang, shattering the silence. Walter's heart jumped as he reached for it. "Hello?" His voice came out hoarse. "Mr. Jenkins? Mr.?" Peterson's voice crackled through the line. The judge just handed down her decision. Walter closed his eyes, gripping the kitchen counter. "And?" "You won. Full custody granted to Charlotte, with legal guardianship rights extended to you." The judge was particularly moved by Marcus's letter and the community testimonies. Walter's knees weakened, and he sank into a kitchen chair. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered. "Charlotte and Emmy can return home today." Mrs. Bell's petition was denied completely. "Mr. Peterson paused. "Congratulations, Walter. You've got your family back." After hanging up, Walter wiped his eyes with trembling fingers. He busied himself straightening Emmy's drawings on the refrigerator, smoothing each one with careful attention. The house would soon be filled with life again. An hour later, the sound of car doors closing made Walter hurry to the front window. Charlotte was helping Emmy out of their lawyer's car, both of them wearing matching smiles that lit up the gray Pittsburgh morning. Emmy looked up at the house, spotted Walter through the window, and broke into a run. Walter yanked open the front door just as Emmy reached the porch. She launched herself into his arms with such force that he stumbled backward, catching her tight against his chest. "Grandpa Walt," she cried, burying her face in his neck. "We won. We get to stay forever." Walter held her close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, feeling her little heart beating against his chest. "That's right, baby girl," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Forever and ever." Charlotte appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Walter opened one arm, and she stepped into the embrace, completing their circle. For a long moment, they just held each other, their quiet sobs and laughs mixing together in the sunlit entryway. "Did you see Grandma's face?" Emmy asked, pulling back to look at Walter. "She got all red and stomped out like this." She climbed down and did an exaggerated impression of Rosemary's angry exit from the courthouse, making Charlotte laugh through her tears. "Emmy?" Charlotte gently scolded, but her heart wasn't in it. The relief and joy were too overwhelming for proper parenting at the moment. "You know what this calls for?" Walter asked, straightening up and wiping his eyes. "A celebration." Emmy bounced on her toes. "Ice cream?" Even better. Walter headed for the kitchen, Emmy skipping behind him. "Root beer floats." "Yes." Emmy clapped her hands as Walter pulled out the ingredients: vanilla ice cream, root beer, and tall glasses he'd saved for special occasions. Charlotte leaned against the doorframe, watching as Walter lifted Emmy onto a kitchen chair so she could help. Together, they scooped generous portions of ice cream into each glass while Charlotte turned on the radio, letting soft music fill the kitchen. "Now watch this," Walter said to Emmy as he slowly poured the root beer. The foam rose dramatically, making Emmy squeal with delight as it nearly reached the rim before settling. "It's magic," she declared, carefully accepting her glass with both hands. Walter distributed the remaining floats, and they clinked their glasses together in a toast. "To family," he said simply, his voice warm and sure. "To family." Emmy echoed, root beer foam dotting her nose. The radio switched to an upbeat song, and Emmy's eyes lit up. She set down her float and tugged on Walter's hand. "Dance with me, Grandpa." Walter pretended to protest, but his eyes twinkled as Emmy pulled him into the center of the kitchen. Charlotte watched, laughing, as her daughter stood on Walter's feet while he guided them in a gentle two-step around the kitchen island. "Mama, you too," Emmy called, and Charlotte joined their impromptu dance party, taking Emmy's hands while Walter spun them both. The kitchen filled with the sound of their laughter, Emmy's giggles echoing off the walls as they danced. Walter's normally serious face broke into a wide grin as he watched his granddaughter twirl, her joy infectious and pure. Charlotte caught his eye over Emmy's head, and they shared a look of profound gratitude. This was what home felt like, Walter realized. Not just the building or the memories it held, but the living, breathing love that now filled every corner. The sound of Emmy singing along to the radio, slightly off-key but completely uninhibited. The way Charlotte's eyes crinkled when she smiled, so much like Marcus's used to. The warmth that spread through his chest watching them both, knowing they were here to stay. Between sips of root beer float and improvised dance moves, Walter caught glimpses of all the moments that had led them here. That first morning on his bus route, Emmy's drawing of their family, countless shared meals, and quiet conversations. Each piece had fallen into place, creating something beautiful from the broken parts of their lives. Emmy broke away from their dance to retrieve her float, taking a long sip that left her with a frothy mustache. "This is the best day ever," she declared solemnly, making both adults smile. Charlotte wrapped an arm around Walter's waist, resting her head against his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Walter squeezed her shoulders, watching Emmy attempt to balance her empty glass on her nose. "No, thank you both. For bringing life back to this old house. For giving me a second chance at family." Emmy abandoned her glass balancing act and rushed over to join their hug, squeezing herself between them. "Group hug," she announced, wrapping her arms around their legs. The kitchen was a mess of half-empty glasses and puddles of melted ice cream. The radio played on, mixing with the sound of their laughter and quiet tears of joy. Outside, the Pittsburgh sky had cleared to a brilliant blue, as if nature itself was celebrating their reunion. Charlotte sat at Walter's kitchen table, staring at the letter in her trembling hands. The morning light streamed through the window, catching the tears that threatened to spill from her eyes. I can't believe it," she whispered, looking up at Walter, who stood nearby, a proud smile on his weathered face. "A full scholarship? The Margaret Wilson Foundation for Single Parents." Walter read over her shoulder, his voice warm with pride. "They're giving you a chance, Charlotte, just like you deserve." Emmy sat cross-legged on her chair, munching on her breakfast cereal. "Is Mommy going to be a student like me?" she asked, milk dribbling down her chin. Walter grabbed a napkin and gently wiped Emmy's face. "That's right, sweetheart. Your mama's going to college while you start kindergarten." Charlotte carefully folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. "But how will we manage? The timing of classes, picking up Emmy." "Now don't you worry about that," Walter said, settling into his chair with his coffee mug. "I've already worked it all out. The community college is just 3 blocks from Emmy's school. And since I've switched to afternoon bus routes, I can help with morning drop-offs and pickups." Charlotte's eyes widened. "Walter, I couldn't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." He reached across the table and patted her hand. "That's what family does." The next morning, Walter drove them to the community college in his old pickup truck. Emmy bounced in the back seat, singing a made-up song about her mom being a student. The registration office was busy with last-minute enrollments, but Walter had insisted they arrive early. "Mr. Jenkins," called out Mrs. Rodriguez, the enrollment counselor he'd spoken with earlier that week. "And this must be Charlotte." She smiled warmly at them both. "I have all your paperwork ready." As Charlotte filled out forms, Walter entertained Emmy with stories about when Marcus was in school. The little girl sat in his lap, completely absorbed in tales about her father's childhood adventures. All set, Mrs. Rodriguez announced after an hour. Charlotte, you're officially enrolled in the Early Childhood Education program. Classes start next Monday. Walking back to the truck, Charlotte hugged her course schedule. I never thought I'd get this chance, she said softly. To study, to become a teacher. You were always meant for more than what your mother told you, Walter replied, helping Emmy into her car seat. The following week brought Emmy's first day of kindergarten. She wore a new blue dress that Walter had bought her, with matching ribbons in her hair that Charlotte had carefully tied. The classroom was bright and colorful, filled with the excited chatter of children and nervous parents. Look, Grandpa Walt! Emmy tugged at his hand, pointing to a reading corner filled with pillows and books. Can we read here sometimes? Walter's heart swelled at her question. You know what? I might be able to do better than that. He turned to Miss Thompson, Emmy's teacher, who was greeting parents near the door. Do you folks still need library volunteers? Miss Thompson's face lit up. Are you interested, Mr. Jenkins? We'd love to have someone read to the children during story time. And just like that, Walter found a new purpose for his free mornings. 3 times a week, he'd sit in the school library's worn armchair, surrounded by eager kindergartners. His deep, gentle voice brought stories to life, and the children hung on every word. Emmy would beam with pride, occasionally whispering to her friends, "That's my Grandpa Walt." Charlotte's classes fell into place perfectly with their new schedule. She'd attend morning lectures while Walter volunteered at the school, then head to her afternoon shift at the cafe. Walter would pick up Emmy after story time and drive his bus route, with their neighbor Mrs. Peterson watching Emmy until Charlotte came home. One evening, as autumn leaves started to turn, Charlotte spread her textbooks across the kitchen table. Emmy sat next to her, carefully coloring in her own notebook, trying to imitate her mother's studying. Walter watched them from the doorway, his heart full. The house that had once felt so empty now hummed with life. There were Emmy's drawings on the fridge, Charlotte's textbooks on the coffee table, and children's shoes by the door. Need any help? He asked, setting down 3 mugs of hot chocolate. Charlotte looked up from her child development textbook and smiled. Actually, would you mind quizzing me? We have a test tomorrow on early literacy development. Of course. Walter sat down, picking up her study guide. Emmy, want to help quiz your mama? Emmy nodded enthusiastically, abandoning her coloring. She climbed into Walter's lap, just as she did during story time at school. As they went through the questions together, Walter marveled at how naturally it all felt, the way Emmy leaned back against his chest, the proud smile on Charlotte's face when she got an answer right, the comfortable silence between questions, filled only with the scratch of pencil on paper and the ticking of the kitchen clock. You know, Charlotte said during a study break, one of my professors said something interesting today. She said that education isn't just about learning facts, it's about creating possibilities. Walter nodded, understanding deeply. That's what your daddy believed too, Emmy, he said softly. He always said knowledge opens doors. Emmy looked up at him with Marcus's eyes. Did Daddy go to college too? He sure did, and he would be so proud of both his girls right now. Walter's voice grew thick with emotion. So very proud. Charlotte reached across the table and squeezed Walter's hand. No words were needed. They all felt Marcus's presence in that moment, blessing this new chapter in their lives. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Morning drop-offs became a cherished routine, with Walter calling out, "Learning time," as they pulled up to their respective buildings. The school library became his second home, with children gathering around him like eager ducklings, Emmy always choosing the spot closest to his chair. Charlotte's grades were excellent, her natural intelligence finally finding its proper outlet. She'd often share what she learned with Walter in the evenings, her eyes bright with excitement as she explained new concepts about child development or teaching methods. Their little family had found its groove, each person supporting the other in their own way. Emmy's kindergarten adventures provided daily entertainment. Charlotte's studies gave her new confidence, and Walter's storytelling brought joy to a whole new generation of children. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter, questions about homework, and the simple sounds of family life. It wasn't the family any of them had expected, but it was exactly the family they needed. The church basement had never felt so warm. Walter arranged the metal folding chairs in a circle, his movements deliberate and careful. The coffee pot bubbled in the corner, filling the room with a rich, comforting aroma. He stepped back, counting the chairs one more time. 15. Pastor Mike had said there might be more coming. Need any help, Mr. Jenkins? Miss Dorothy, the church secretary, poked her head through the doorway. Think I'm set? Walter replied, adjusting one last chair. Just hoping folks show up. Oh, they'll come, she assured him with a knowing smile. Word's gotten around about what you've done with little Emmy. People need hope like that. Within 30 minutes, the chairs began to fill. First came Mrs. Thompson, raising her 2 teenage grandsons since their mother's passing. Then Mr. Rodriguez shuffled in, holding his grandson's hand. One by one, they arrived. Grandparents with stories etched in their faces, all carrying the weight and joy of raising another generation. Walter cleared his throat, his bus driver's voice steady and clear. Welcome to our first grandparents' circle, he began. I'm Walter Jenkins, and like you, I never expected to be raising a grandchild at this stage of life. The group shared knowing looks and gentle nods. Walter continued, but here we are, given a second chance at something beautiful. It ain't always easy, but it's worth every minute. Mrs. Thompson spoke up first, her voice thick with emotion. Some days, I feel too old for this, she admitted. The boys have so much energy, and I can barely keep up. Tell me about it, Mr. Rodriguez chuckled. My grandson's into these video games. I don't understand it all. The conversation flowed naturally, stories of struggle and triumph mixing with practical advice and shared experiences. Walter listened more than he spoke, watching these brave souls open their hearts to each other. By the 3rd week, they needed more chairs. Word had spread beyond their church, bringing in grandparents from all over Pittsburgh. They shared resources, swapped babysitting duties, and formed a tight-knit community. One Wednesday evening, as Walter was setting up, Charlotte appeared with Emmy in tow. His granddaughter carried a large piece of construction paper, her face beaming with pride. "Grandpa Walt!" Emmy ran to him, paper fluttering. "Look what I made for school!" Walter knelt down, his knees creaking slightly, to examine her artwork. There, drawn in bright crayons, was their family tree. But Emmy had done something special. She'd drawn Walter as the strong trunk and roots, his arms branching out to hold everyone else. Marcus was there too, drawn in golden yellow, connecting Walter to Charlotte and Emmy. "See?" Emmy pointed. "You're holding us all together, like a real tree holds up its branches." Walter's vision blurred with tears. He pulled Emmy close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Charlotte stood nearby, watching with gentle eyes. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," he managed to say. "May I keep it here in our meeting room?" Emmy nodded enthusiastically. Walter carefully pinned it to the bulletin board, where it became a beacon of hope for other grandparents in the group. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Walter held Emmy's small hand as they walked through the cemetery gates. She clutched a fresh drawing in her other hand, her steps careful and respectful. "Is this where Daddy is?" she asked softly. "Yes, baby girl." Walter led her to Marcus's headstone. The military marker gleamed in the morning light, Marcus's name sharp and clear against the granite. Emmy studied the stone, tracing the letters with her finger. "Was he brave?" "The bravest," Walter answered, his voice thick. "Just like you." Emmy carefully placed her drawing at the base of the headstone. It showed 3 figures, her, Walter, and an angel she'd colored in army green. "Thank you for my grandpa," she said clearly, addressing the stone. "He makes the best pancakes, and he reads stories better than anyone. I wish you could eat pancakes with us, but I'm glad you gave me such a good grandpa." Walter's heart swelled almost painfully in his chest. He remembered all those lonely mornings after Marcus died, how empty his house had felt. Now, standing here with Emmy, he felt Marcus's presence more strongly than ever, not as a loss, but as a gift they kept giving. Emmy slipped her hand back into his. "Can we get ice cream on the way home? Daddy would want us to have ice cream." Walter laughed, wiping his eyes. "You know what? I think you're right about that." They walked back through the cemetery, Emmy skipping every few steps. A warm breeze rustled the trees, carrying the sweet scent of spring flowers. Walter thought about his growing support group, about Emmy's family tree drawing, about the mysterious ways love could heal and transform. At the cemetery gate, Emmy turned back for one last look. "Grandpa? Yes, baby girl? I'm glad you're my tree." Walter squeezed her hand gently. In the distance, church bells began to ring, their clear tones carrying across the morning air. He thought of all the grandparents in his group, each one a strong tree for their own precious saplings, and felt profound gratitude for this unexpected season of his life. The morning sun painted Pittsburgh streets in soft golden light. Walter held Emmy's small hand as they walked toward Highland Park, her skip steps matching his slower pace. She wore her favorite yellow dress, the one with tiny daisies that Charlotte had found at the church donation center. "Grandpa Walt, look!" Emmy pointed at a butterfly dancing past them. "It's saying good morning." Walter chuckled, his deep laugh warming the air. "Sure is, sweetheart. Looks like everyone's happy to be out today." Charlotte trailed behind them, her backpack full of textbooks hanging from one shoulder. She'd been studying hard for her psychology class, determined to make the most of her scholarship. Her hair caught the sunlight, reminding Walter of autumn leaves. "Emmy, slow down a bit for your mama," Walter called out as Emmy tugged at his hand, eager to reach the park's entrance. The park sprawled before them, a canvas of green dotted with early morning visitors. Dog walkers nodded hello, and joggers passed with friendly waves. Walter had walked these paths hundreds of times alone, but now each step felt different, lighter somehow. They found their spot under the old oak tree, their weekend ritual for the past month. Charlotte spread out a worn, checkered blanket while Emmy twirled in circles, her arms stretched wide. "I brought your favorite, Grandpa," Emmy announced, reaching into her little backpack. She pulled out a slightly squished peanut butter and banana sandwich wrapped in wax paper. "I made it all by myself." "Did you now?" Walter raised an eyebrow at Charlotte, who smiled and shrugged. "I only supervised the banana slicing," Charlotte admitted. Settling down with her textbook, Walter took the sandwich, noting the uneven edges and too thick spread of peanut butter. It was perfect. "Best sandwich I've had all week," he declared after taking a bite, making Emmy beam with pride. The morning unfolded slowly, peacefully. Emmy collected dandelions, weaving them into a crooked crown while Charlotte highlighted passages in her book. Walter leaned back against the tree trunk, watching them both. 5 years ago, he'd sat in this same spot, crushed by the weight of losing Marcus. The park had been a place to escape, to sit with his grief, where no one could see. Now watching Emmy chase a grasshopper across the grass, her laughter carrying on the breeze, he felt Marcus's presence differently, not as a sharp pain, but as a gentle warmth. "Mama, can you tell the story about when you met Daddy?" Emmy flopped down between them, dandelion crown askew on her dark curls. Charlotte closed her book, sharing a glance with Walter. "Well, it was right here in this park, actually. I was reading on this very bench, and your daddy was doing his morning run, in his army shorts," Emmy added, having heard the story many times. "That's right." Charlotte smiled, her eyes distant with memory. He stopped to ask for directions to the water fountain, except there wasn't one nearby. "He just wanted to talk to you," Walter said softly, remembering how Marcus had told him about meeting a pretty girl in the park. He'd been so nervous, making up that excuse about the fountain. Emmy snuggled closer to Walter, her small hand finding his. "And then they fell in love. Right, Grandpa?" "Just like that," Walter agreed, though he knew the real story had more complications, more pain. But sitting here now, with Emmy's warmth against his side and Charlotte's gentle presence, those old hurts seemed to matter less. Charlotte pulled out their snack bag, distributing apple slices and cookies. Emmy arranged hers in a careful pattern on a napkin, just like Marcus used to do with his food when he was little. "Look what I learned in school." Emmy jumped up, cookie crumbs on her dress. She began spinning in a clumsy pirouette, counting out loud. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Walter watched her dance, his heart so full it ached. He remembered darker days when this park had been his refuge, when he'd walk for hours trying to outpace his loneliness. Now here he sat, surrounded by love he never expected to find again. Charlotte reached over and squeezed his hand, as if reading his thoughts. "You okay?" Walter nodded, his throat tight. "Just thinking about second chances." "Second chances?" Charlotte repeated softly, watching Emmy, who had now convinced a nearby child to join her dance routine. The sun climbed higher, warming their backs. A gentle breeze carried the scent of grass and late summer flowers. Walter pulled out his handkerchief to wipe cookie crumbs from Emmy's cheeks when she returned, breathless from dancing. "Grandpa, will you push me on the swings?" Emmy asked, already tugging at his hand. "Give your old grandpa a minute to get up," Walter chuckled, joints creaking as he rose from the blanket. As Emmy ran ahead to claim a swing, he turned to Charlotte. "You coming?" She shook her head, gesturing to her books. "I've got to finish this chapter. You two go ahead." Walking toward the playground, Walter felt lighter than he had in years. Emmy's excited calls of, "Higher, Grandpa, higher," mixed with the park's everyday sounds, birds singing, children laughing, leaves rustling in the breeze. Between pushes, Walter found himself whispering, so quietly that only the wind could hear. This is what second chances look like. Emmy's delighted squeals filled the air as she soared higher, reaching for the clouds, and Walter knew that Marcus would be proud of the family they'd become. The morning stretched on, golden and perfect, each moment a gift Walter had, never expected to receive. As he pushed Emmy on the swing, her joy infectious and pure, he silently thanked whatever force had brought them together. This unlikely family born from loss and love, growing stronger with each passing day. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Walter Jenkins, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.